Hello and welcome. My name is Topher and you've joined me for another slow chat. I am at a hotel. I'm on my 4G. I'm hoping that my internet is strong enough to cope. We're going to find out. We're going to find out as we go. I was hoping to start the show with an epic sunset shot. There was a beautiful sunset going on off the balcony here. But obviously I scheduled the sunset at the wrong time of the day. And so we've missed out on that. But that's just unfortunate. You're just going to have to take my word for it. It was very, very pretty here about 15 minutes ago. I saw it, and it sucks to be you. But we knew that already. Okay, we're off to a great start. I'm already insulting my audience. My name's Topher. This is a slow chat. If you're not familiar with slow chats, they involve some whiskey. This is the Ashland. Which one is this, actually? I don't know which one I've grabbed. This is their Shiraz cask. And the Ashland are actually a Griffith-based distillery, and we went past there on this road trip that we're on. We picked that up, so I'll be enjoying that tonight. And I'm also going to be enjoying this. It's called a Leaf by Oscar. This is their sun-grown. It's a Lonsdale Vitola. This is actually a leaf of tobacco around the outside. I'll just take off the retail label. And this label here is actually made of tobacco stems as well. So literally this entire, everything I've got here, completely 100% biodegradable, natural, and smells pretty darn good too. So I'm going to unwrap that, cut that, and light that once I bring James on the show. For those of you that want to complain about why you're smoking a cigar, please feel free to post as much as you like, because you feed the algorithm, and there is no way in hell you're going to change my mind. I enjoy it. I'm going to be throwing bugs off the balcony all night as well. I've already had a bunch land on my table. It's bad for my body, and it's very good for my mind. I find it just works wonders for my headspace and helps me to have fantastic conversations with people like my guest tonight, James Hol, who, for reasons that I am struggling to grasp, decided to interrupt his perfectly enjoyable, sensible, sane life and become a candidate in an election. Why anybody would do that? I mean, okay, I get it. If you're like a sadomasochist, if you're like into pain, if that's kind of your thing, well, I guess maybe that makes sense. Okay, become a politician. Perfect. You're going to endure an enormous amount of pain for the rest of your life. Well done, you, if that's your thing. Why any normal, well-adjusted human being would do that, I have no idea. So there's one of two questions to answer. Either there is a good reason, or James is not normal and well-adjusted. And we're going to answer that question tonight as we go along. So guys, settle in. Make sure you've got the comfy spot on the couch. Make sure you've got a drink, maybe some snacks. And if you're into that sort of thing, maybe one of these as well. Let's fire up the comments. I see there's a bunch of people commenting already, so thank you for that. I'm close enough to the computer this time to actually be able to see what people are posting. So Tim says, let me get the trolling started early. I'm going to need to see your shoes to make sure you are not a Freemason. Well, my friend, let me test my flexibility. Ta-da! All right. I am not wearing red shoes. I'm not a Freemason today, but I might be tomorrow. I might pull out the red shoes tomorrow. Sucks to be me. I'm in Sydney. No, I got out today. Yes. Nice rustic look. Yes, on the cigar. Absolutely. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Everyone become a politician. We would bankrupt the country just on the salaries alone. So that might not work out particularly well, but you know what? Let's give it a crack. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad somebody noticed. Thank you, Lorna. I really appreciate that. Okay, we're off to a great start. Let me bring on my fabulous guest tonight, James Hol, who is running as an upper house. I always say Senate, but at the state, it's not the Senate. It's the upper house. An upper house candidate in the upcoming South Australian election, which is 2 days away. So, James, welcome to a slow chat.
Thank you, Topher. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a big fan of yours for a while, so here I am.
Okay, so already we can tell that you might not be well-adjusted and normal. Okay, that's a good piece of information. I do have one question for you. What the hell is wrong with you? What was your life before you volunteered for politics? Was it like a train wreck? Is there a reason? Are you running away from something? Have you got a double life going on and you're trying to escape? Why would you do this to yourself?
Well, you never know. Maybe I am a little bit of a sadomasochist. But speaking of, I think the best place to start, and this will actually segue quite well, is with my whiskey. And we didn't plan this, but I'm also drinking a Shiraz cask, a beautiful South Australian.
Iniquity, you're right.
Iniquity there, which is also Shiraz
Now
cask, which I'll pour myself
that's
now.
a Solera rye, if I'm not mistaken. So that's actually a rye whiskey,
Yes.
a sweeter sort of a whiskey.
Yeah, it's quite nice. I quite like it. And representing my home state as well.
Yes,
yeah, actually,
that is a nice touch. Well done. You're an upper house candidate, and you are repping the produce from the state. Well played. I'll give you that.
Thank you. But I was actually worked in bars before I came into politics, which is, I'm a little bit of a whiskey snob because of that. And great to be here with another whiskey snob too as well.
Look, if I have to rank my snobbery, I'm a coffee snob, then probably Melbourne, a cigar snob. Yeah, we're Melbourne. I can't help myself. Then a cigar snob, and then a whiskey snob. So, look, my whiskey snobbery is not the most irritating feature about me. I do have some even more irritating features, but it is up there. It's got to be up there as one of my most irritating features.
It's got to be, right?
We've got a good question here, actually.
What's the point of drinking nice whiskey if you can't be a snob about it?
What's the point of life if you can't irritate some other people before you die? So we've got a good question here, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's actually just a really good question. So at risk of jumping ahead, That's Funny asks, how much of a bellwether will the South Australian election be in relation to the federal election and the Victorian election? What are your thoughts on that, James?
I think it is the bellwether election, really. I mean, yes, there's been a few by-elections. Okay. There's been the local council election in New South Wales, but this is the first real state election that's going to happen since sort of the vaccine mandates and all that sort of stuff has happened. The WA election was, from my memory, before all the vaccine mandates and stuff like that. Back when everyone was like, govern me harder, daddy, that kind of attitude. Now that the sort of now that the dissent and the resistance is sort of coming a lot more, this will really be the bellwether. There is a little bit of a difference, though, I suppose. There's no UAP running in the South Australian election.
Oh, is there not? Oh, they don't do state. Yes, you're right. Yes.
So that might make a little bit of a difference. So it's not going to be a 100% accurate replica, but I think it'll be a good bellwether. Also, there's this sort of notion that South Australians tend to vote a little bit more independent generally anyway, as you saw with people like Nick Xenophon and SA Best and those kind of parties that have been around in South Australia for a long time.
The other interesting thing about South Australia is it's often regarded in the federal election as kind of being the kingmaker. It's a bit of a swing state. And so I think if we see South Australia really break in a clear direction when it comes to either of the major two, then that's going to set panic into the other at a federal level. But of course, what I'm hoping for is to see it break really strongly in favor of what I'm calling the freedom-friendly minor parties. And of course, the Liberal Democrats, for whom you're running, I'm a financial member, full disclosure. I am a member of the Liberal Democrats, although they're going to have to change their name soon. My understanding is they lost that federal court case, and it is now illegal for anyone to use a word in their party name that has already been used by somebody or is already being used by somebody else. So they're going to have to change their names, but not till after your election, and by the sounds of it, probably not till after the federal election.
At a state level, it actually doesn't matter, right? So it doesn't actually technically affect our ECS, our Electoral Commission of South Australia registration. And I imagine it's the same in Victoria as well. So it's actually just the AEC. I mean, whether the party chooses to change it at all the different state levels is a different thing, but they don't actually have to.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if that's your internet or mine, but you just froze for a second. So viewers, can you let me know? It's probably my internet. I'm running on 4G. It's the best I've got. The hotel internet is rubbish. So just let me know, and I'll try and move the phone to somewhere where it might pick up a tower or something. I agree, Kelly. I've not personally met Pauline, but I've spent a lot of time with Malcolm Roberts, who is also a Pauline Hanson One Nation senator federally. Very, very impressive guy. I have deep differences in my politics compared to Pauline Hanson One Nation, compared to Malcolm Roberts, but you cannot help but admire his work ethic and his intellect, and we would do well to elect more people with that intellect and that work ethic. I hear good things about Pauline, but I've not had the pleasure of announcing. Now, That's Funny says that UAP's actually just announced they will run in the state election in Victoria. So that could get interesting.
Yeah. Well, in terms of Pauline Hanson's One Nation, I think they're a great choice. We've got them second in our preferences in the upper house. We deliberately preferenced, which is probably the most frequent question I get. So thanks for that. It's probably partially your doing, Topher.
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Yep.
So we're preferencing Foundation and Bob Day's Australian Family Party as 2 and 3.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm big fans. I think they've done great work.
Yeah, I think they've done very good work. Okay. Someone just I'm just switching across to 5G. I had it turned off because it was just too sketchy before. So let's just see if that improves. Okay, you've frozen, but that might be because it's switching networks. All right. Let's hope this catches up sometime soon. Come on. Yes, here he is. Okay, we're back. Okay. I'm now on 5G. It's on 3 bars instead of 4G on 2 bars. So thank you to Louise. I do have a 5G phone. I just forgot that I had a 5G phone and I'd switched the 5G off because reasons when I was out of the country. Okay. All right. So I've got some questions for you. I'm now just reading out all of the viewer questions. I've got some questions for you. You have put your hand up. And you're at risk of actually winning a seat. If things go horribly, horribly wrong, you might actually end up winning your seat. Is that fair?
I know. Yeah, it could very well happen. I'm first on the ballot. I'm in Group A. Very first, very left column.
Okay, that's dangerous because the last time that happened for the Dems. Yeah, David Lionel managed to get up. So that's oh goodness. Now, people might wonder why I'm characterizing winning as a bad thing. I'm just coming at it from my personal point of view. I wouldn't want to have to do that job. Anyway, that's another story. Well. 8-year term. It's like a prison sentence. You could do armed robbery and spend less time behind bars.
I know, right? I'm considering.
Well, that'd get you out of being an upper house member because you'd get barred after a criminal conviction. So,
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit about who was James Hol before you made the fateful decision to put your hand up for this in a bit more detail. So you mentioned where you were working before and what you were doing, but just give me a bit more of a broader perspective because I have a theory that it usually takes a particular kind of personality and a particular kind of outlook for someone to want to be in politics. And that often the person that wants to be in politics is the worst possible person to have in politics. So I'd be curious to get to know you a little bit better, what you were doing, what you were up to, what your ambitions were, and what your thinking was. Because as much as I give you a hard time about what if you win, realistically, you're a 25% chance at best, even being on the front of the ballot. You're a 25% chance. There's a 75% chance.
I think have me at about 38%.
Do they really?
Yeah, $2.
Wow. Yeah, wow. That shocks me. Okay, so but anyway, it's odds against, right? It's odds against. So odds are you've interrupted your perfectly normal, happy little life to then go and do a run for a political seat that you statistically won't get. And then you're going to have to continue on with life. Talk me through this thought process. What are you trying to achieve?
So, I mean, before, as I said, I was actually in Melbourne, back in your great city of Melbourne, back in great city of Melbourne, back in 2018. And then, working in bars, I managed a few bars there in Melbourne and then came back to, my family's here and all that. So sort of came back to be back with them and start university, law and economics, studying that, and sort of move into that direction of life. And then, the COVID stuff started. This was, March 2020. COVID stuff started. I was like, all the bars basically closed down. I was like, all right, maybe this is a good opportunity to sort of move into something else, focus on my uni, move in that direction. Was looking at starting my own business and those kind of things. I thought, maybe this will be a few months at best, and then we can all get back to life. How wrong I was. Over 2 years later now. And it just got worse, and I just couldn't really sit back and watch what was going on. So I sort of, I got active. I went to the protests here that we have in Adelaide. I attended a lot of them. And then, I'd been following the Liberal Democrats for a while, probably about 10 years or so. But like just a cheerleader from the sidelines. But then at some point I'm like, what, these guys are doing something, and I've got to, actually act on, it's easy to complain on social media or attend a protest, but what more can I do? So I joined the party financially, which is something I never, ever thought in my life I would ever financially join a political party. and joined the party. Started helping out. I chaired the policy and founded and chaired the policy committee here in South Australia, and did that. And then eventually, when pre-selection time came around, I'm like, well, you know what? If no one else is going to do it, I'm going to put my hand up. What's the worst that can happen? And here I am.
Here you are with the lead on the front of the ballot. Oh, goodness. Exactly. Okay. So that's funny. He's pointing out, check what the bookies are saying. Apparently they can predict these things very well. Typically bookies are more accurate than pundits and more accurate than polls. Yeah. Typically, not like there's exceptions, but typically if I had to back one of them, one of the three pundits, polls or bookies, I'd back the bookies. So that's got to be a little bit scary, James. So okay, so you joined a party. You said that's not something you ever thought you would do. This, I think, is very typical Aussie. Are you Aussie background, or are you sort of second generation immigrant, or what's your sort of?
Yeah, so my dad was born in Amsterdam, but he moved here when he was 5 years old. And my mum's background is Italian, but she was born in Australia. Mm-hmm. So 2.5 generation immigrant.
I find apathy to be a very Australian trait when it comes to politics. Apathy would be our key defining characteristic, I suspect. That she'll be right, mate. What can you do? You can't change anything anyway. And so the vast majority of us, like you said, would never imagine ourselves to become a member of a political party. What I find is usually there's something specific, not for everybody, but for most people, there's something specific that just ticks them off just enough that they decide, you know what, screw it, I'm going to get involved. Was there a specific catalyst for you, or was it just a natural progression of having been that cheerleader on the sidelines?
Well, I think I've been a libertarian for a long time. I'm 28. I just turned 28 recently. And I've been a libertarian since before I could vote. But I think it was really the COVID stuff that tipped me to the point where I'm like, you know what? I've got to do something more than just complain. And, I think this was probably even before the vaccine mandates and stuff, more like lockdown. I mean, in South Australia, we weren't too bad lockdowns, but restrictions on, hospitality industry and many other industries as well. And watching what was happening in Melbourne too. I was born in Melbourne, so my birth state. Yeah. And seeing what's happening and seeing, it's such a beautiful city in Melbourne. I really love it. I lived there, as I said, and just seeing that, I'm like, if that's happening to the neighboring state just over there, well, what's going to happen over here?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I think the thing. I remember having New South Wales and Sydney especially kind of laughing at us when we were being locked down and everything else in 2020. They were kind of sitting there laughing at us as though it was somehow the fault of the average Melburnian, the average Victorian. And then, of course, they got their own little taste of lockdowns. It really was sweet fuck all compared to what we'd had. And they lost their freaking minds. And all of a sudden, they were the ones clearing the shelves of all the toilet paper and everything else. And we got to have a little giggle back at them, after all the hypocrisy. But this is the thing. If this is allowed to happen in a free democratic country, a state with, like Victoria, within a free democratic country, well, then none of us are actually immune. None of us are actually safe. How would you characterize politics in South Australia? I mean, as we know, federally, it's a bit of a swing state. It is seen as kind of the kingmaker state federally. What's the state politics like internally?
It's interesting. As I said, there's sort of always been that sort of like third party option that's around. The last election, it was Nick Xenophon's SA Best. SA Best still exists, but they don't really have Nick Xenophon behind them. So I'm not sure how well they're going to do. Of course, we've famously got Sarah Hanson-Young. Unfortunately, it's a great shame of my state as one of our senators in Canberra. So it is quite a unique state, I think. But it's I feel like it's a bit of a halfway house between Victoria and Western Australia. We kind of have that little bit of isolationism and separatism that WA has, but we've also got that little bit of sort of, we're trying to be culturally different like Victoria is as well.
Yeah, right. And you've got some really great motorcycling roads. You've got some good wineries. There's a feu good distilleries there, and you're enjoying the wares of one of them. So, I mean, from my point of view, all you need is a tobacco industry, and then I'd be happy to move there. You'd be.
Let's bring it over.
We're going to have to talk to the Australian Taxation Office about that one. Believe it or not, tobacco growing in this country is not actually illegal, but it's made so prohibitively expensive by the tax office that no one bothers.
I thought you needed a permit for it, right? And it's just very, very
you need a permit,
difficult to get.
But it's a permit via the ATO. And then as soon as you put the seed in the ground, you have to pay the ATO the tax per kilo of the maximum yield that seed might produce.
That's insane.
So
I knew it was pretty.
Yeah,
I know it's worse in South Australia. It's worse than growing cannabis. If you grow tobacco.
Oh, 100% it is. 100%. So anyway, sort that out, and I'll consider moving there, because Lord knows there's a good chance I'll be getting out of Victoria. So okay, you're running as a candidate. Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. You're running as a candidate. I'm not even sure that I know what that means. What does it mean to be a candidate? I mean, at all? Firstly, what are you even doing? How do you try and get votes? Like your job during the campaign, we hear about campaigning all the time. Oh, they're on the campaign trail. Great. What does that mean? What are you doing?
Oh, you wear a few hard hats, you kiss a few babies. No, but seriously, it's one of those things. It's very challenging, right? A lot of it is like my whole house is basically taken up with core flutes, as you can see behind me there. With like shirts and everything. It's a mess you don't want to come to my apartment right now. It's an absolute mess. And I eat once a day these days. I get a few hours of sleep, right? So there's a lot of downsides to it. But the thing that I really do like is actually getting out among people and actually talking to real people, because it's very rare that you actually do that as just a normal human being. You have your friends or whatever that you might speak to, but you sort of just go to a group of random people and speak to them. And it's great because that's real Australians, real South Australians, real Adelaideans. And it's that part of it is the part that I really enjoy. So I try and make the most of that, and I just try and have fun with it, with that thing. It's one of those things I say a lot. It's like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? Particularly with what's going on at the moment. I think it's just trying to make the most fun, but it is stressful. It's very stressful, and obviously you sort of put your whole life on display for anyone to pick at, and lob stones at. I've had people, my mom, I've had people have a go at me. I've had, my phone number's publicly available, so I've had people call me, and so that's fun. It's not all photo roses, but you take the good with the bad, I suppose. Yeah, and to be honest, most of it's been pretty good.
You've been doxxed, have you? Like, did you publish your phone number, or did somebody else?
Yeah, I chose to. Yeah, so there's a form you fill out when you sort of nominate yourself as a candidate, and you can choose to. And I chose to put it out, so I doxed myself. Right.
You're a brave man. So how are people meeting you? I mean, this is the thing that always intrigues me. You look at even massive Liberal Party, Labor Party, big events, campaign launches. There's maybe a couple of hundred people there. In the biggest ones, you might get a couple of thousand people for a federal one, but that's very, very rare. In a country of 25 million people, there are sweet fuck all people that actually want to show up and meet a politician. So how do you get people to, like, are you organizing events and publicizing them, or are you just literally walking down the street and going, you're holding a baby, let me kiss it?
So some events we do ourselves, but what I've actually found has the most traction is if you go to events for things, you don't just like rock up, sort of events where where it might be applicable that you speak. So like, say I was at the Freedom Rally, I had a speech at the Freedom Rally, the last one, I think it was the 5th of March or something. There's a few like these freedom picnics that sort of happen in more regional areas as well, that I've been to a few. And that's what I find is the best way, sort of a group of people that's already there that you can come, that sort of has some sort of shared connection with what you're talking about, particularly in this sort of COVID era. It's a lot of freedom related stuff. So, and just talk to them, and they're more than happy. They want to, particularly as we get closer and closer to an election, they want to, and which is great. And I think you're a big part of the reason why people are like this now. They want to know more about politics. There's so many people, and I'm really happy about this, that so many people reach out to me like, I've never voted before, or I haven't voted in a really long time, or I haven't taken my vote seriously in a really long time. I don't know what to do. Can you please help me? Yeah. And I'm more than happy to help you. Even if you hate me, even if you absolutely hate me, I'm more than happy to help you to make your vote count.
All right, so let's get a little bit specific then, because there are people asking me this question all the time. There were people that wanted me to do sort of my own Topher selected how to vote cards for the South Australian election, and it just didn't time well with me trying to take a step back and trying to just get a bit of mental.
You looked at the regulations behind how to vote cards in South Australia as well?
No, I haven't.
They're insane, yeah. I actually spoke to Joel Jamal about this recently, and he said he was going to do it.
Yeah, because he's doing work on the federal election.
Yeah. That was just so strict that he was like, I can't do this.
Yeah, wow. Okay, no, I haven't looked at it at all. So anyway, within the regulations, because I don't want you to get yourself into trouble, tell us where you're running for the upper house, because I'm assuming it's the same as Victoria. There are different districts, northern, southern, some city ones, some country ones, etc. So where you're running and how people should vote, in your opinion, or how does the Liberal Democrats how to vote card look in your seat in South Australia?
So you're wrong in terms of our upper house. Our upper house, the Legislative Council, the same name, is one. It's like the new Western Australian system. It's one district, right? So my electorate is the whole great state of South Australia.
Very cool.
Which is good. I actually like that system better. So any person in South Australia can vote for me, wherever you are, from from Bethany to Mount Gambier, wherever you are.
Yeah, I like it. I like that.
Fine. Yeah, I think that's better. In terms of how to vote, I'll get you one. Be 2 seconds.
Sure. Please do.
This is our how to vote card here. All right, so it's 1, Liberal Democrats, less government, more freedom, which is how we'll appear on the ballot. Other way. 2, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, and 3, Australian Family Party. That's who we recommend to vote for in the SA upper house.
What are the rules over there in terms of the minimum number of boxes you have to number?
You only have to number 1.
Okay.
Box.
All right.
Right. It's not a group ticket like the old system.
Yeah.
But which is technically how it's actually very identical to how the federal election works. I know they say on the thing that you have to number 1 to 6 for federal elections, but technically you only have to number 1. I don't recommend doing that, but technically that's still a valid vote. It's called a savings provision.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Not a lot of people know that, but that's technically how it works. So it's the same here, except we don't actually have that savings provision rule. So they just dispense with the savings provision and say all you need to do is number a 1 in the box. I really wouldn't recommend doing that because you're very likely to die, expire. Yeah. But technically it's going to be a valid vote. If you vote below the line, you've got to number at least 12. We've actually got a savings provision for 6, but I'm not really allowed to talk about that.
So for those that haven't seen my marbles video where I talk about preferential voting, the 1, 2, 3, 4 business, if you vote number 1, James Hol, and he has, and this isn't going to happen, but hypothetically, James had the lowest votes out of all of the Senate candidates, he would be eliminated first, and then his votes, those votes would be moved to then number 2. Now, there's a couple of things I want to make really clear here because there's some misconceptions about this. People still think that parties pass preferences on, that there are backroom party deals going on where one party goes and says, oh, well, we'll preference you. So everyone that votes for us is your votes are going to end up over there. Correct me if I'm wrong with the South Australian system, but in Victoria, in the federal election in Australia, that's been abolished, and your vote goes where you say it goes and only where you say it goes. Is that valid for South Australia?
That's 100% correct, and thank you. I get this question all the time, and I'm happy because it means people are trying to tune in to politics and they've been not tuning in for a while. But the other side of it is it does get frustrating because it's like, no, your vote only goes where you decide to put your vote. Right? If you decide to follow the how to vote card of whatever party 100%, then it'll go that way, right? But that's only because you decided to follow it. So ultimately, you are the sole arbiter of where your vote flows. If you put a 1 in the Liberal Democrats, less government, more freedom box, then it will go to us and it will expire and go nowhere else. It's not going to secretly go to the Liberal Party or secretly go to some other party. That system is long gone. So you're allowed to do a 1 just above the line, but it's not. It's just going to go to the party you select, and that's it.
Yeah. In order to maximize the chances of some of these, what I'm calling freedom-friendly minor parties, and my criteria for that, I've set a pretty low bar. All I'm saying is if they are freedom-friendly when it comes to lockdowns and vaccine mandates, then for the purposes of this round of elections, South Australia, federal, Victoria, and then New South Wales next year, for the purposes of this round of elections, I'm going to just throw my weight behind all of them, right? Now, in my opinion, the Liberal Democrats are the only genuine freedom party because you apply, I say you, we, because I'm a financial member, apply the principles of freedom to every area of life, not just to some, and sort of selectively do it on an issue-by-issue basis. But what matters right now is the pain that's being caused by the lockdowns and by the mandates, and I'm going to get behind any party that is going to stand up to that. So I would love to see people putting yourself and Liberal Democrats at absolute number 1, and then following that how to vote card. because what we can do then is, if let's say One Nation get 3%, you guys get 4%, and who was third on your ticket?
Australian Family Party, which is Bob Day's
Australian Family Party. Let's say they get a couple of percent as well, okay? And let's say Australian Family Party get knocked out, but they've done the right thing with their preferences and they flow to you and to One Nation. And then let's say One Nation are the next one to get knocked out, but their voters have done the right thing with their preferences and they flow to you. Then you could easily end up with 8, 9, 10. I don't know what a quota is in South Australia. I don't know what you need to get. But, sorry, say that again.
8.33%.
8.33%. Okay, so that's a quota. You could get there if the freedom-friendly minor parties pool their votes. And by pool their votes, I mean their voters, because the party can't make the decision anymore. It's up to the voters. The voters use the preferential system properly. Okay. So...
Yes, 100%. That's a very important thing. Everyone, please.
Yeah. And I would rather, if it's not going to be James, I would rather see One Nation or the Family Party get their candidate up than another Green or another Liberal or another Labor or another National, right? So please, even if you're voting for James Hol number 1, vote number 2, vote number 3. And that way, if your vote for James expires for any reason, it goes to them. Because honestly, I hate to play the lesser of two evils game, but, they are going to be a far better option. Whatever you may think of some of their policies, they're far better in other areas that really matter than the major parties are. Okay. Tell me about...
I'm using this whole COVID stuff. Sorry, just quickly.
Yep.
I'm using this whole COVID stuff as a barometer. So sort of, this COVID stuff as a whole barometer for sort of freedom, right? And even if I get elected, right, let's say I get 10%, which gets me a quota and roughly 2% spare. That extra 2% then goes on to One Nation or whoever you vote for, right? So even if I do get elected, it's not like that the extra is wasted, right? So unless you're the exact vote that gets me elected, I suppose, every other vote, your preferences will flow on and are very, very valuable. And the more people, if I'm just in by myself, it's going to be difficult. I'm going to work my ass off, don't get me wrong, but it's going to be difficult. If I have 2 or 3 others with me, even if they're not, in my party, but they're One Nation or Australian Family Party or Family First or some independents, then there's a lot more that we can do.
Correct. So that's a beautiful segue, because where I was heading was to talk to you about what actually can someone do. I mean, people like David Lyon-Helm and David Limbrick and Tim Quilty here in Victoria have had this issue where there are people that come to them and say, but you're a senator, but you're an MP. Why haven't you fixed this yet? Kind of there's this idea, if we just get one person in, then somehow magically they're going to be able to do everything. So talk to me a little bit about how it works and the realities of, being in the upper house of any Australian state. And what are the things that you do think you can actually achieve, assuming that you do get in?
Well, my number one priority, if I get elected, and I do think it's very achievable, I've already heard some, there's already some other minor parties that are willing to work on it, is end the state of emergency here in South Australia, which is beyond a joke. It's been here for 2 years. It's absolutely ridiculous that this is still going on, that we're basically ruled by the police commissioner of South Australia for 2 years. He's basically become the king of this state. It's absurd. So that's, what you can do is you can leverage your votes on important issues from less important issues. Right. So if they say some bill to, do something I'm not really too concerned about, I can say, I'll support you on this, provided you support me ending the state of emergency or whatever it might be. Right. So that's really where you can go as sort of one person. And if your vote is crucial, then that's going to matter a lot. And I think what we're going to see in South Australia, I hope, and I do think this will be the case, is we're going to see a minority government in the lower house, which doesn't really concern me, but that's, I think, still good. Yeah. And I think we'll have a pretty strong balance of power. And I hope it's going to be people like One Nation. Hopefully it's me and my runmate, Peter, who will be up together with me. But if not, it'll be, say, not Jennifer, Sarah Game from One Nation, or say Bob from Australian Party, or any of those. And that would be great to have them, because then there's a block of us. Then we can all say, you know what, when it comes to COVID stuff, when it comes to the state of emergency, we're all going to vote this way. If they want our support on other things, we're going to leverage that support for ending these emergency powers. And that's really what you can do. You can also do things like, and David Limbrick is great at doing this stuff. I'm a really big fan of David. I've spoken many times. And so with Tim Quilty. and you can sort of bring in much, you know, sort of, you know, table things and get those things, and sort of you can be a voice to people who don't have a voice.
Yeah. You're breaking up a fair bit for me at the moment. Viewers, can you let me know, am I breaking up or is just James breaking up? I don't know if this is my internet or yours at this moment in time, mate. So if you're watching, can you just let me know where the trouble is? And I
think that's really important. At least, you know, there's someone who said, you know what, I'm going to stand up for these people.
Yeah. So I think we're having trouble hearing each other. Yeah. Okay. Just James is the answer I'm getting. So James, your internet's pretty bad, mate. I'm going to send him a text message. Let me just, James, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now, James? I've just sent him a private message. I don't know whether he will see that or not. James, can you hear me at all? Can you hear me, James?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. No issues on my end. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we're back. No issues. Can hear you. Okay. Yeah. You broke up really bad for a little while there. Okay. So what we're talking about is basically, if you're fortunate, then you're in a position where they need your vote for a piece of legislation. And for Victorians, we have a very painful memory of exactly this, because as someone pointed out in the comments, which I'll just try and find this comment here, that James. Daniel Andrews needed the support of one more MP in the upper house in order to pass his permanent pandemic powers bill. And who did he get? Thank you, James Bennett, for reminding me of this. He got Rod Barton, right? And he managed to get this so-called independent in the upper house to come and support him. Now, imagine if instead of having Rod Bartons and, you know, the Sex Party and the Greens and Reason Party and whatever else in the upper house, that are mostly socialist, left-leaning, anti-human. I do not think that is an unfair characterization for most of these parties. I think they're actually anti-human. Imagine if instead of them we had some pro-freedom parties that were being negotiated with, and what a difference that could make. So before I move on, I do just want to bring up one comment. Patricia, yes, I do. That is all.
Keep smoking.
Okay,
Topher.
so
I'm in an apartment. I wish I could have a cigar right
now. Look, it would be nice. I think I've only had.
It's not very libertarian. It's not very libertarian of me. But...
No. That's right. Look, even libertarians get in trouble for setting off smoke alarms and sprinkler systems. So probably best not to do it.
You know, it's the Strata's a private entity, I suppose. You know, not. A government.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's right. So. What you said, you became a libertarian before you could even vote. It's a pretty nerdy thing, you know. A lot of libertarians are very cerebral, right? And can be accused of being quite heartless and so forth at times. So, what was it about it? Was it a cerebral thing for you? Was there an issue that you saw that alerted you to the concepts of freedom? What was it? Why did you become a libertarian at such a young age?
For me, it was just like, I didn't, you know, some people like, you know, they read a bunch of Ayn Rand or something like that, or they read, you know, On Liberty or something like that. For me, it wasn't that. It just was quite logical. It's like, well, you know, let me do me and you do you. And if no one's getting hurt, well, then let's do that. Right. And for me, I don't I know almost all libertarians say this, but it's like, I don't see how there's any real other option. For me, what drew me to it is probably more social issues. I think it was like the Afghanistan and Iraqi wars that were sort of going on, you know, post 9/11, that were going on, and that sort of drew me into libertarianism, and then things like the war on drugs and those kind of things. Pulled me in more. And then as I got older and sort of realized that money and economics is important, I also, you know, came into the free market side of things, because I was probably more left wing, which we all are when we're young, unfortunately. Maybe not all, but most.
I was but then not. I was sort of... I'm ashamed to say I was a hardcore conservative, and in all the worst ways, in all the worst connotations of that term, I was a hardcore conservative. And it was my early 20s where I began to break. It was actually the army. I spent a couple of years in the Army Reserve, and it was actually that that began my journey away. But so you were a lefty. You were a nasty little commie when you were a kid. What changed that?
Well, it was when I sort of started understanding more economic and monetary issues, where I was like, well, I'm going to apply those same principles of like, leave me alone, let them, let people decide in that sphere. But my lefty friends didn't really agree with me there. So I didn't, I probably was never really a lefty. I just didn't realize that I was a libertarian until I sort of discovered that economics is important too.
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of people that fit that description. They consider themselves to be left-wing because they are anti-government intervention on things like drugs or relationships or other things like that, sort of personal choices. And so they look around and they see, oh, well, those are my people. Those people agree with me on these issues, so I must be one of them. And unfortunately, libertarianism, principled freedom, where you're applying freedom to all areas, not just to some, is such a niche position in Australia that many people never even come across it. Why did you come across it?
Yeah, as I said, I think it was just logical. And then, I was sort of like, well, what this thing that I am, right? I agree with the left wing on things like drugs, say, for example, and I agree with the right wing on things like free market, right? So what am I, And then I sort of discovered the term and the culture behind it and those kind of things. And then I was like, oh, okay, I'm a libertarian. I
must be one of those.
I'm like, exactly. There's a party that represents me here in Australia. Back then, there was a very small party. But there is one that represents me here, and so that's sort of how I just sort of put two and two together, and now here I am.
Yeah, very cool. So we've actually been joined by a West Australian Senate candidate. So you've said Senate, Kate. So I take that to mean you're running in the federal election, and she's tuning in while it's halftime in the Carlton. Oh, she's a Carlton supporter. Get out of here! Get out of here! I don't want you on my show. For crying out loud. I should have read that before I put it on the screen. I'm so sorry, everyone. I really apologize. I don't normally let Carlton supporters on my show, but that one slipped through. I'm so sorry. No, thanks for joining us, Kate. I do appreciate it. So what's that experience like as a younger man? Because I was in my 20s by the time I started to really change politically. Until my early 20s, I was what my family told me was right. And it was only in my early 20s that I began to break away from that. For you began to break away from that younger. What's that experience like? What's the impact on your social life, your dating life, all that sort of stuff, when you become sort of this real niche sort of philosophy where you don't just fit in anymore with any one group?
Yeah, well, it's ebbs and flows, I think, because it's like, you sort of like, I remember sort of saying this sort of stuff about taxes. I was just reading Kate's comment.
I've started it. There's a shit fight going on in the comments now. There is a shit fight going on because of my comments. All right, sorry, continue.
I can see, I'm a Port Adelaide guy, right? I can sort of, you Melbourneites fight about football. But yeah, I sort of, what was I saying? I sort of, I found it. There's
the impact on your life.
So it was, yes, yeah. There was ebbs and flows. So it's kind of like, it's quite unique. I remember talking to my friends about tax related stuff, and they were like, when there was high school students and even uni students, they're kind of like, but it's great, people need to pay their fair share, that kind of, all those slogans, vacuous sort of throwaway terms. And then now that they're working, I'll speak to them and be like, oh, that stuff you said about tax. It's like, tax is a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, it is, isn't it? So it does come and go, so you sort of, swings and roundabouts and that kind of thing, right? And also it makes you a bit more interesting. It's like, yes, you can be a bit of an outcast because of it, but because you're a bit different, people are a bit more interested. You're a bit more fascinating. People want to have a bit more of a conversation. They want to understand what you're about. You don't fit a mold that most people are used to speaking to or dealing with.
Yeah, and look, I found the same thing as I entered in. Look, I've got an amazing. Yeah, I love these guys. They're just amazing. They put a smile on my face every Thursday night. So I had a similar experience in my 20s. I think there's a big difference between your mid to late teens versus your mid 20s. I think there's a lot of growing up that happens there. And I certainly went through a period of time where I didn't fit in all that well. I didn't do myself any favors. I was I was pretty willing to discuss politics even when other people didn't necessarily want to. I was a little bit of one of those. I've always been very willing for people to disagree with me, but I discovered too late. I'm sidebarring here. When I started doing my first Topher videos, and this is approaching 13 years ago now, I trained myself to speak. I had the script. I learnt the script. I trained myself to speak in very complete thoughts, not because, I think I'm right about everything, but because that just seemed like the right way to speak. And when you're on camera, you don't want to be umming and ahhing and hesitating and stumbling over words. So I trained myself to speak that way. And it was only a few years later that I found out that I was coming across in my general social life as this incredibly arrogant asshole. Now, I am a little bit of an arrogant asshole. I'll wear that, but I'm not like a incredibly arrogant asshole. And I discovered that it was actually because what would happen is a subject would come up. And yes, I was a little bit too eager to talk about politics. I should have dialed it down, but you live and you learn. And so I would then put in my thoughts, thinking that this was just a contribution of here's where I'm at, for other people to then go, well, actually, I disagree with you because of this and this. But I would state my case so forcefully that even people who felt that I was wrong and might have had a good argument for why I was wrong, people that I might have been able to learn from, felt that I was closed. I wasn't open to an actual conversation. So the way that I was saying things didn't accurately reflect where I was actually at with the conversation. And I think that there's a libertarianism has a big marketing problem, because we tend to be too cerebral. We tend to be too passionate. We tend to be too eager to talk about it. And because we talk about this stuff all the time, we come across as closed. We've thought about this stuff. We've got our argument. It's there in a nutshell. We make that argument. It's forceful. It's compelling to some. It's not compelling to others. But no one feels like they've got permission to actually engage in conversation. And I don't know how to fix that problem. But I think the problem that I had in my 20s is not unique to me. I think this is pretty broad across the whole sort of movement. You said you didn't get into libertarianism by reading Ayn Rand, etc. Have you since gone on to read a bunch of that sort of stuff?
A little bit, but I think, the way I sort of operate is a bit more like, I like to experience it myself. Reading something in a book, like I'm not knocking reading. I think it's very important and I do it myself. But, I think it's more like real life is really what matters. And most people that are probably watching this, and most people in general, probably just, want to get on with their lives. And, reading, taking a few hours out every night to read is not really something they have the luxury to do.
Sure.
But in terms of what you were saying before, I think that's very important. Like the libertarian purity test, that really bugs me, right? And I've, don't get me wrong, I've done it myself. But it's sort of like, what we've got to do, and what the liberty movement really needs to do is stop kicking people out because they're not libertarian enough or they're not, pure enough, and they've got to actually accept people who might be a bit more conservative leaning or even more left wing leaning, right? Who are starting to explore liberty.
Correct.
And actually welcome, rather than say, no, go away, you're not good enough.
Yeah. This ticks me off. People want to have this argument between anarchism, minarchism, libertarianism, etc. And I'm like, I don't care, right? We're arguing about whether we should be here, or here, when at the moment we're about a kilometer that way. Like, let's actually get to the point where it's almost relevant, and then we'll have that conversation, right? It becomes, and this is... it becomes a pissing contest. It becomes this, like, I'm more pure than you, but you're all living in this completely esoteric, theoretical world that has no application in the real world. In the real world, and this is something that I would hope you've given some thoughts on. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You talked about the wheeling and dealing, right? The fact that if you want to get something, if you want to make a change as a senator and they need your vote, then you're probably going to have to give them something in return. You're probably going to have to say, right, well, I'll support you on this if you'll support me on that. That's reality. That's how it works. How do you keep yourself, though? Because yes, it's politics, but that's also the reason why most freedom-friendly politicians who get elected end up being very big disappointments, because you can rationalize, and I know this from two members of the Liberal Party who are currently federal MPs, who I knew before they entered politics or before they were elected as MPs. They had very good freedom values. I wouldn't have necessarily called them libertarians, but they understood the importance of freedom. And then they got in there, and within months, They're putting out press releases and things, saying things that I know that they didn't used to believe were true. So how the hell do you achieve a different result if you're the one that gets elected? How do you manage that?
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those things, right? I think that's one of the unfortunate realities of the big parties, at least the Liberal Party. I'm sure the Labor Party is the same in the other direction. Probably more strict from my understanding. But it's like the good thing about the Liberal Democrats, and this is, I've said this many times, and I'm more than happy to say it many more times, is when I joined the party, I agreed that I would never support an increase in taxes and I'd never support a reduction in liberty. And that's my guiding principle, right? And I'm not going through this whole thing. I'm not stressing myself out. I'm not eating less. I'm not sleeping less. I'm not, having my privacy blown out for everyone to see, to sell out on that, right? I can make more money in other ways, right? Money's, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to look down on people who say who's struggling with money, right? It's a very important issue for a lot of people, but there's other ways to make money. And yes, politicians get paid probably too much, very much so in my opinion. But that's not it, right? I'm here because I think there's a real problem that needs to happen. There's a real problem that is happening and that needs to be addressed. And we really need to attack it. And I think we need, as much as it's yes, it's very difficult. And politics is definitely not for everyone, right? Becoming a candidate is not for everyone. But we need more normal people. We need more people like you and I that actually get out there and put their hand up for this, because otherwise you get these people who are in student politics, then they went to become a staffer to work for some other politician and, pay their dues to the party. And then they go and become a candidate and run for office and their whole life has just been politics. You need some people who have outside experience that's running their own business, working in hospitality like myself, working in retail, whatever it might be, working in finance and getting out and actually putting themselves out there and becoming politicians. Yes, career politicians, as Kay said. Exactly. We need less of those, and we need to return politics to the people.
Okay, so I've got some fantastic comments coming through on YouTube that I want to bring up here, because I actually suspect it's probably the same person under multiple different accounts. So the brilliant thing about YouTube is you get an enormous number of trolls, and the trolls on YouTube are really dedicated to their craft. They don't come in, make a trolling comment, and then piss off and do something better with their night. No, they stick around. It's just fantastic. So James, this is like his 10th comment already. Gopher is a politically illiterate douche nozzle. Thanks, James. I appreciate that. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day. Now, a supposedly different... It's supposedly different person. So this is James Asherton, someone calling themselves Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl, of course, is famous for having stood up against the Nazis and was executed by the Nazis for doing that. So this individual has stolen somebody else's name, but also calls me Gopher is censoring Australians. I'm not quite sure how I would achieve that. I don't know if you've noticed, I run a page where people get to say stuff, and I don't put up everything that every person says, but I have no capacity to censor anybody outside of my pages. So how I would qualify for censoring Australia? I mean, you flatter me. I clearly have more power than I realized that I actually had. And then liberalism is a commie pox. Gopher says he's liberal, and I believe him. He needs to rely on censorship to get tiffed. Right. So here's the censorship thing again. So I'm going to go with all three of them have called me Gopher. Two of them have mentioned censorship, and they've all come in at the same time. I think someone's got multiple accounts running and they're having a bit of fun. Can I just say, please stick around, because I rely on people like you. YouTube loves the fact that I'm getting all this interaction on this video, and people like you help to make sure that a lot of... Oh, here we go. Here's another one. Sorry, I skipped it. Yeah, stop censoring Aussies. Gopher, different account again. Different account again. Gopher and his grifters are done. Right, so the bots are at work. But then there's also
a bit jealous. Sorry, jealous. You got a lot of haters there. I actually like having haters. It makes me feel special.
Yeah, it's great. So then Still Human says, I'm real, read mine. Yes, I know you're real. I don't know what your real name is, but you've made a couple of good comments. So this is getifted, isn't it? He's my new favorite troll word. All right. So anyway, sorry. I love feeding the trolls, and the YouTube trolls are particularly committed, and I want them to stick around and keep commenting. So having done that now, they'll stick around for at least another hour or so while we have a chat. Okay. So what actually needs to be done? Let's move aside from, we've talked about what's actually politically realistic, and the sad reality is what's politically realistic for a freedom-friendly senator, unless there's a lot of you, is pretty minimal. right? The best you can really hope to achieve, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, but tell me if I'm wrong. Realistically, the best you can hope to achieve is to make things less bad.
Basically, yeah. But the other thing is, and this is still in the vein of making things less bad, but say like your second reading speech, this is, I'm getting my law nerd out, but your second reading speech, like say, value when judges look at interpreting laws. So there is also some value in having some in Parliament on the Hansard and on the record. Also sort of culturally, I suppose, but in a real legal sense too. So it's not entirely, pointless, but it is, yes. Basically, a good summary is exactly what you said, making things less.
Yeah. So let's put that aside. Let's put aside the political reality that's what we're faced with. And let's talk about what would be ideal. What are the problems that you would love to fix, assuming that you actually could? What do you see? You said before there's lots of problems. We've got some big problems. What are they?
Well, I think, first of all, I probably said this many times, and I'm sure your viewers will get sick of it by the time I'm done, is to end the emergency powers here in South Australia. It's been absolutely insane. It's ridiculous. And, it's one thing to sort of, subverting protest and a lot of those things, but also it's just the fact that democracy has been subverted for 2 years. For 2 years, the Police Commissioner of South Australia has run this state. That's insane. If you said that back in 2018 or 2019, people would laugh at you for saying that that's what's going to happen, right? The purpose of emergency power laws is to give Parliament some time. It's like, say, if a fire, say the floods that are happening in various parts of Australia right now. So you can evacuate people because you don't have time to go to Parliament. What should happen if there's a serious thing like this is they should go through Parliament to enact legislation to deal with this issue, right? Which leads me to my next point, which is that we need to reform these powers, reform these like the Emergency Management Act here, so that there is time limits on these things, so that there is an accountability mechanism, so there is a protection for human rights, so there is some sort of punishment for people who abuse this power. So those are the real key things. But I think we've passed that. I think a big thing here in South Australia is energy independence. Like, it's sort of I don't know if you guys get this in Victoria, but we basically have a blackout once a year. In a large part of the state, we actually import energy from Victoria. So I think we really need energy independence. We've got so much uranium here in South Australia, 30% of the world's uranium here in South Australia. We've got geologically stable land. We could be a nuclear, and I'm not saying it has to be nuclear, right? But we could be a nuclear powerhouse. And the fact that it's illegal to even consider nuclear is insane. You've got a great, the cleaner, in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of data to back this up, the cleanest, the greenest, and the most reliable energy source in abundance here in South Australia, and we're just looking away from it deliberately.
And can I add also the safest? In terms of lives lost per terawatt hour produced, there is no safer form of energy than nuclear, and that includes what happened at Fukushima. That includes what happened at Chernobyl. Right. But even with those events, Long Island, you put them all together, every nuclear disaster that we've had, you put them all together per terawatt hour produced. It is the safest form of energy that man has ever devised. Safer than wind power, safer than solar.
Yes, 100%. And even like some people are like, oh, what about these big events like Fukushima or Chernobyl or whatever? It's like, all right, at the same time they support hydro, right? Which could, if there was a failure at a hydroelectricity processing, dam or whatever, that would cause really serious, devastating problems. And so, you sort of have this double, sort of double position where it's like, all right, nuclear could have these really terrible sort of major events. I suppose technically that's true, but so could hydro, but no one ever talks about that.
Yeah, correct. And it has happened. That's not a hypothetical. It has happened. Many people have been killed by dam failures. And the comeback, because I've had this conversation, the comeback is, yes, but we build dams better now. Our dams that we build today are safer. Well, guess what? We build better nuclear plants too. The nuclear plants we build today are not the same generation that was built at Chernobyl or at Fukushima or at any of these places. In fact, we've now got nuclear plants that have been, I believe they've now been approved. Some of these small modular reactors are now in the very early stages of actually starting to be rolled out in reality, that actually shut down if there's a failure. They don't go into a runaway meltdown if there's a failure of the cooling system or something. They actually shut themselves down. It's phenomenal, the focus and the engineering that has now gone into their safety. And if they were already the safest form of energy known to man, which they were, then the latest generation stuff that we would be building, if we were to build something today in Australia, it would be of the latest generation. It is even safer again. It's ridiculous that we ban this. I will say, though, that's a federal issue, not a South Australian state issue. Talk to me first about state. We'll get to federal stuff that affects all of us in just a minute.
SA and
in South Australia, so obviously end the state of emergency, 100%, got it. What else would you want to see happen within your state?
I think, right, so South Australia is like, it's got the most public servants in all Australia.
Oh, wow.
To my knowledge. So I think we've really got to unwind a lot of this sort of thing. Like healthcare is a real big issue here in SA, and there is some real legitimate issues that need to be dealt with in terms of ramping and all those kind of things. I know there's a bit of that in Victoria, but SA really had really bad. And as much as I'm not a big fan of sort of like funding these things and enlarging government to make these things better, like something it's the thing is, right, Labor sort of here in South Australia, Labor, they love this. They talk about that Stephen Martin spent $662 million on a basketball stadium while the healthcare system is in crisis, which, I'm not here to defend Stephen Marshall. He's terrible, right? But, if it was as simple as just throwing money at it, it would have been solved long, long ago. I think it was in 2018, we spent 6% of our state budget on healthcare. Right, so it's not just throw money at it. That's politicians can throw money at things very easily. That's their favorite tool. That's the easiest thing they can do, right? So we've actually got to look at what needs to be done. It's like, okay, if some funding needs to go to it to fix some very specific issues, then fine, I can accept that. But with let's say private industry, right? Got KPIs. You've I've got to achieve this, and that. Otherwise, I don't get paid as much as I should or as much as I want to.
Sure.
So we should really be implementing that same thing in government, right? If the health minister says, all right, I'm going to put X million dollars into the healthcare system because we need to fix this, and that, well, his pay and the pay of high-level bureaucrats as well. I'm not talking about frontline nurses and those kind of people, but high-level bureaucrats should also be dependent on achieving those outcomes. And I think that's 100%. Just a great model for the government in general.
100%. It is interesting. There is no incentive that I'm aware of within the public service to become more efficient, to come in under budget, to over deliver on there is actually a perverse incentive to run over budget and to say next year, oh well, I need more budget, because my understanding is once you get up into that higher level of the higher levels of the bureaucracies, your pay packet is somewhat tied to the size of the bureaucracy that you're actually over, the number of employees, the number of people you're managing, etc. And therefore, if you can run over budget and need more money, you need more people. We weren't able to get all the work done this year. We need to expand the department. Then you can actually bump yourself up in influence as well as in your pay packet by doing that. They have the exact opposite incentive of what the private sector actually does.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what's happening? I was gobsmacked by actually, that's not true. Because gobsmacked implies that I was surprised. I wasn't surprised. I was surprised by how blunt he was about it when I saw ScoMo being interviewed by what's his name from Sky. It was like a buddy interview that he did recently with Paul Murray. Yeah. And ScoMo was bragging about his economic management. And I kid you not, I posted this on my page. The video's there from a few days ago. He says, we are better economic managers and we've got a tough 10 years ahead. We need good economic management, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes on to prove that he's a better economic manager by talking about how much more he has spent on certain line items in certain areas. Right? I'm a better economic manager because I spend more. And that came out of the mouth of a so-called liberal prime minister. Where are we at? How did we get to the point that this guy can sit there and say this is good economic management and no one challenges him? Paul Murray didn't challenge him. No one in the audience challenged him. What's going on?
I'm just gobsmacked. This happens so often in politics. And I knew this before I was a candidate, but now that I'm a candidate, I see it so often and it really frustrates me, particularly being a libertarian candidate. It's like, oh, well, I spent this much, it's like this, measuring contest, right? It's like this pissing contest. It's like, oh, well, I spent 700 million. Well, I spent 800 million. So therefore,
but it's not their money.
No. I know, right? It's just absurd. I mean, the fact that it's like, that's really what it's come down to. It's like, who spent more money? It's like, no, well, how actually has that money achieved any goals? That's really what matters. We can all, anyone can piss away money that's not theirs as well.
Yeah.
That's really easy to do. Give me $1 million, I could piss it away in a night, right? You know, but that's not really going to achieve anything. Well, not for anyone else, maybe for me. But, yeah. It's just absurd that we've really come to this. And the fact this sort of like line that the Liberals love to trot out every 3 to 4 years, that they're great economic managers, is a lie. Yeah. Even in relation to Labor, they're awful. I mean, if you look at the Liberal Democrats' policy deficit, you can look at a graph that we've got there. UAP have used as well, which I don't actually mind because it's sharing the message why. And it's the fact that Liberals under their government have racked up insane amounts of debt. They're not good economic managers. We're not talking about the Liberals of Menzies. We're not talking about the Liberals of Howard, who were fiscally conservative and who did have, even though there was some issues with Howard, don't get me wrong, right? I'm not like this Howard fanboy. But they at least had some level of like, right, let's bring in the spending. Let's balance budgets at the very least, right? Howard was lucky because he was in a quite economic time. But this idea, no party apart from ours that I'm aware of, and maybe a few other minor parties, are really talking about stopping spending, because the thing is, it's not popular. People like their service they get. But when we start, debt is one of those things where I think John Humphreys actually talked about this when he was on with you, where it's a cliff, right? You can keep walking and it's fine. But as soon as you fall off that cliff, it's a big problem. And it's very, very, very difficult to get back on top of it again. And we're getting very close to that edge, in my opinion.
I agree, and I don't want to lose our spot in this thread of deficit and spending. I want to come back to that in just a minute, and particularly around the voting aspect and how hard it is to wind back spending because voters want more of it. But Adam's asked a great question. Adam Sidebottom's asked a great question here that I want both of us to chime in on. I'm bothered that everyone hates the Liberal government. There's only 2 parties that can win. Libs suck a fair bit, but Labor will destroy us, no question. What's your plan? Adam, I don't disagree. I've got my own answer to that, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, James. So what's your response to that view and that approach to it? And we're talking federally here.
Yeah. I think there's some truth to that, right? I'm not going to lie and say, like, I think Liberal Democrats are going to take government in the next cycle, or even UAP or One Nation or any of those parties, or even some coalition of those parties. I don't think that's going to happen, right? It might maybe in 10, 20 years, right? But let's talk about now. I think we've still got to look a little bit further. This is my theory, right? I can't, it's just my opinion. I'm not saying I've got data to back it up. But I think in some ways, one of the things that's happened with the Liberal Party is that they're quite successful somehow, at least federally. And there's a lot of these like political hands-on, I call them, right? The people who have come into the party because they want to get their own glory and their own fame. And maybe the best thing for the Liberal Party is to have a few cycles out of office so these people can get flushed out and chase the next big thing that they think will pursue them. And then they can go back to their core values a bit more. Because if you read the Liberal Party website, it sounds great. But if you look at what they're doing, it's awful. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I had this, I had an amazing opportunity given to me when I was very early in my time as a political commentator. I'd only done a couple of videos, and I got an invitation to speak at a Victorian Liberal Party branch meeting. So this is not federal, this is state. Victorian Liberal Party branch meeting out east of Melbourne, a long way east of Melbourne. And I got this invitation. I said to the guy, listen, I appreciate the invitation, but you're not going to like what I've got to say because I'm not a Liberal Party backer at all. And he said to me, no, you don't understand. I've watched enough of your stuff. I'm pretty sure I'm going to like what you have to say. It's just the others in the room that aren't going to like what you've got to say. And I just said, okay, well, you've given me permission. So I'm just going to go in. I'm going to go hard. So what I did was I went in there. They introduced me. And I stood up and I read word for word Robert Menzies' speech when he founded the Liberal Party. And in his speech, it's a really, really great speech. Everyone should read it, whether you agree with their policies or not. You should read it and see the vision that Robert Menzies had in the very, very first place. And in it, he talks about what the Liberal Party is supposed to stand for and what it is that they oppose. He spends as much time talking about what they oppose as what he does what they support. They were opposed to the welfare state. They were opposed to creeping socialism. They were opposed to the government getting bigger and having more power, etc. And so I finished that speech. And then I simply said, if you were to read the policies of the Liberal Party today, would you think that they were the policies of the party that Robert Menzies founded or the policies of the party that Robert Menzies was warning us against. And then I sat down. And that was it. About 3 people spoke to me afterwards. Out of a room of, I don't know, maybe 50 people, only about 3 wanted to talk to me. The rest of them avoided me like the plague. So we do have a massive problem, Adam. And the argument that you're making there has validity, but it is the lesser of two evils argument. And for as long as you continue to do that, then the two evils can progressively get as bad as they want. As long as they're both getting bad together, there's nothing you can do about it. What needs to happen is for a new political force to appear in Australian politics. This is what happened with the Liberal Party. When Robert Menzies founded the Liberal Party, he did not found a major party. He founded a non-existent party that had no seats, no power, no influence. And they grew to become what we think of as one of the big two. And we think that this big two dynamic is going to be how it is forever. This is just how it is. Two-party politics is never going to change. Well, hang on. Why not? It didn't used to be this way. It doesn't have to stay this way. In Europe especially, it's very, very common for what's called minority government. And that's where no party has a majority in the lower house. Lower house is where the government is formed. Whoever has the majority there gets to be the prime minister and the treasurer and everything else. We can create a situation, and there is a chance that we can do it at this federal election. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm hoping it's going to happen. But there is statistically a reasonable chance that we can create a minority government situation at this coming federal election. What that means is neither the Liberal National Party nor the Labor Greens can actually take power in their own right. They have to negotiate with some independents or smaller parties that hold the balance of power in the lower house. Now, again, we've seen this be a bad thing in the past. Julia Gillard with Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor and whatever the other guy was, okay? We had a bunch of lefties sitting in those seats, a bunch of pork-barreling socialists sitting in those seats, and they dragged the government in that direction. But what if the people sitting in those seats were freedom-loving people? What if they loved humanity? They loved progress. They understood the importance and the power of capitalism and free markets. Then you would have this incredibly powerful force, the tail wagging the dog, so to speak, pushing in the other direction, because neither ScoMo nor Albanese gets to be the prime minister unless they get the support of that group of people, or at least some of those people. So that's really our best case scenario. You ask, what's your plan? That's the plan. And then to build on that success at the next election and the one after that, to get to the point where this whole Liberal-Labor duopoly, lesser of two evils nonsense is put in the past, because we've got to stop this nonsense.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really good point. Like, people sort of think it's like, oh, it's got to be 50% plus one, and that's so insurmountable, which may be true, but it's like, no, actually a critical mass is really only between 5 to 10%. That's all it really takes to start shifting the narrative and to start pushing people in a certain direction where things start to really, snowball and roll on and actually make a change. Right. So it's like, yes, correct. As I said earlier, I don't think, we're going to have a situation where it's like, a Liberal Democrat government in this cycle. Right. But when that happens, it builds up. And I remember when I think it was the Rudd or the Gillard hung parliament happened. I remember learning about it in high school. Right. It's like a hung parliament. Yeah. That's such a rare thing. We haven't had that in 50 years or whatever it was. Now it's like par for the course. Right. We've got a minority government in South Australia. We've got, hung parliaments happen almost all the time now, right? So it's becoming a lot more common.
Yeah, and we can take it a lot further in that direction. We haven't reached the extent of where this can go. The Labor Party, the Liberal Party, the Greens, the Nationals, any one of them could end up being the next Democrats, right? The Democrats were a force to be reckoned with. They were a minority force to be reckoned with, but they were in some elections, they were bigger than the Greens. Now they're gone, and they've been gone for a long time. People have forgotten that they ever existed in some cases. That can happen to the Liberal Party. It can happen to the Labor Party. It can happen to the Greens. It can happen to the Nationals. There is nothing magical about them that guarantees their ongoing survival. What we need to do is offer a real, genuine, viable alternative, and that's what people like yourself are doing. Now, I want to come back to this budget issue because you raised what I think is a really crucial point, and I get a little bit dark when I talk about this stuff because for me, when I talk about this stuff, I start to think, well, maybe there's no way out. Maybe we're done for, okay? And I'm open to the idea that I'm wrong, but that's where my head ends up, and that's this. We have more than 50% of Australian households dependent on some form of government payment in order to make ends meet at the end of every month. Now, that a lot of that's middle class welfare. It's family tax benefits and these sorts of things that make the difference for these families between whether they can pay all their bills at the end of the month or whether they fall short. So how do you, in a democratic country where you need popular vote, how do you get popular vote when you're promising to take away the thing that more than half of the families depend on to make ends meet? Is this even possible?
I think it's a slow, it's a gradual process, right? I'm not going to come out and say let's abolish Centrelink tomorrow, right? That's just not going to happen. Even if I got voted in based on that, right? Not even political, putting political strategy aside, right? It's just not the feasibility of that alone. The infrastructure around that would take so long to dismantle. But I think the thing is decentralization. I think that's the way you got to look at it. It's all right, well, how about instead of the federal government dealing with that, state governments deal with that? It's okay, and maybe that's something you can pull people towards. And it's all right, well, how about instead of state governments dealing with that, maybe local governments can deal with that, or maybe communities can deal with that. And you bring it closer and closer and closer to the person, to the individual, or to the family. Yeah. And then as it gets closer, people realize, actually, it's not that ridiculous, the concept that, I can rely on my community to help me, or I can rely on my family to help me, or I can rely on myself to help myself. And I think that's the real way you sort of tackle these issues. And I think healthcare is a great example. It's welfare, yes, that's true. But the amount of money we spend on healthcare in this country is insane. People think it's the Medicare levy, which is 1% or whatever it is, that covers all of healthcare. Saying no. Healthcare gets covered by the general tax revenue massively, right? Yeah. The Medicare levy is not covering healthcare, right? So it's and I think that's a great way. And I think bring it back to the state. And then when we see that we can bring it back to the state and we can deal with it there, then we can bring it smaller and smaller and smaller and closer and closer and closer to the person. And I think people actually like that, because the idea where you need to go off to some bureaucrat who's far away from you, who doesn't understand your issues, who doesn't know what's going on in your community, who then has to come all the way back, and the inefficiencies of that as well, is not very attractive. It's if we bring that closer, people actually like that concept. And it's I love the US democracy concept, where it's what, if you want to live in a council, or, they call it a county over there, where it's you pay really high rates, but you have these great amenities, go for it. But if you want to live in a county where, your rates are really low, but there's not so nice amenities around you, maybe you work a lot and you're not in your home a lot, then go for it. And you can literally vote with your feet where you want to live. And I think that's the best way to deal with these kind of issues.
Yeah, I know a guy in the US who literally moved from one side of the street to the other side of the same street in order to move from one county to another that had a very different sort of way of approaching exactly those sorts of issues. Now, I brought up this comment from Tim because I think this is a really good comment, but I want to add to it. I think there's a better way than this. So what Tim has said is cut tax first, then roll back some socialism, then cut more tax, and on and on. The problem with cutting tax before you roll back the socialism is you make the deficit even worse in the short term. All right. There's a bit of a freebie here, and there aren't many freebies in the real world, but there is a freebie here, and that is to instead focus on cutting red and green tape.
Yes.
Red and green tape adds costs to the community and to the government. By cutting red tape, by cutting green tape, you can cut down the size of government departments, saving money, and you free up the private sector to do more and to create more jobs and opportunities and GDP and tax revenue. And so I would just add, before you go to cut tax, you go cut red and green tape. A year later, cut tax rate, because by then the effect of the red and green tape cut should mean that the overall pie is getting bigger. You can take a smaller slice of the pie in tax, and your revenue is going to still be fairly stable. Then you roll back some socialism because now there's more opportunities out there. Less people need the welfare because there's more opportunities, because you cut the red tape and the green tape that is depriving people of opportunities. So, Tim, I think you're on the right track, but I'd suggest give some thought to the role of cutting regulation in that process.
I think you're 100%
as well. That's just
on the point. I think you're 100% on point there, Topher. I think, I'm just going to put red and green tape together as red tape. I think red tape is really, people don't realize what a devastation that is. How many businesses have not started? How many times have you been in a group of people and had a great idea and thought, you know what, that's a really good idea, let's look into this. And then you see all the regulation you need to go through, all the business, all the licenses you might need to acquire to start this business. And you're like, you know what? It's not worth it. Or, you know what? I'm going to start it overseas or interstate because it's a lot easier to do that. I think that's true. And the thing is, you'll never know that figure. You'll never be able to tell that. But if you look at statistics, business starting in Australia is going down, and particularly in South Australia, it's on a downward trajectory. And I think it's really tragic. And people don't sort of look at red tape and whatever, okay, yeah, it's annoying, but whatever. But it's actually a really, really big imposition on this country. And I think it's something we really tackle. And I think it's something that actually most Australians probably really don't like. They might have their specific thing they think is worthwhile. But in general, I think most Australians are like, you know what, red tape, it is getting overbearing. It's a bit too much. We need to reduce some of it.
Well, with apologies to my regular viewers who already know this, let me reiterate for your benefit, James, and for anyone that doesn't. I've spent the last, how many years is it now? 5.5 years of my life working on starting a new business in Victoria. It's an outdoor go-karting centre. Now, we found our location where we wanted to be. We went to the council. The council loved it. It's an entirely new model of go-karting. It uses electric carts, so it ticks their sustainability box. That's not why I did it. It's actually electric carts are actually better to drive than petrol ones. But it ticked their boxes. They voted. They passed a resolution in favor of our business coming to their particular locality. Despite having the full-blooded support of the council, it took us 3.5 years to get approval through the planning department. Then we got taken to VCAT, and that took us another 6 months to get through that. So 4 years is lost. Now, the point I want to make here is not pity me. Nobody wins. Nobody wins. Yes, it cost me 4 years of my life, or 5.5 now, because then we ran into COVID. So everything's on the back burner now until we know that we're getting through that. It cost me 5.5 years of my life. It cost my investors and myself a lot of money paying for all the costs involved in getting through that process. But here's the thing. Once we're open, we are creating over 30 new jobs. And these are great jobs for relatively low education people, new immigrants, people returning to work after, having kids or what have you. These are perfect jobs for a lot of people that are underserved at the moment. They are missing out on those jobs right now because we don't exist yet. In addition to that, the business will be generating over $500,000 a year in tax revenue, probably over $1 million a year in tax revenue. So the taxpayer misses out. People miss out on jobs and opportunities. And I and my investors are finding ourselves pissing money against the wall, dealing with all of the red tape. Now, again, don't pity me, but multiply my experience by the tens of thousands of other entrepreneurs that are out there trying to create something. And you begin to grasp the magnitude of what we're missing out on because of red tape. I think red tape is the biggest cancer in Australian politics right now. And getting rid of it would unleash a boom that most people cannot picture in their heads. They do not understand what it's costing us right now, and therefore they can't visualize what would actually happen if you were to scale it back to a more appropriate level. Anyway,
I would say almost every single one of your viewers right now, has been in this situation where they've had a great idea. And I'm not saying every single one of them is going to come to fruition and make heaps of money, right? That's the real world.
Sure.
But every single one of them has probably had a great idea and thought about it and talked about it, and then they've looked at the regulations and given up, right? I would say that's almost guaranteed. Like, I grew up in a small business family, and even in my life, I'm only 28. Even in my life, I've seen how much more regulation has come into play and how much harder it is to start a business. It's just, it's killing. The idea of the Australian entrepreneur is dead, unfortunately. But it is.
It's incredibly difficult. I'll give you 2 other examples that I know of right now. Guy starting a bar in Brunswick. He's taken over a facility that didn't used to be a bar. So he's got his permit to operate as a bar, but in order to meet the requirements, he needs 2 additional toilets, okay? Because the number of patrons is going to increase from what it used to get used for. So then he goes, right, I've got my permit to be a bar, but in order to comply, I need to have 2 additional toilets. So he goes to the council to say, I want to put these 2 additional toilets on. The council go, no, you're not allowed to do that. And he sits here and goes, well, hang on, you gave me permission to be a bar on the condition that I built these toilets, but now this other department won't give me permission to build the toilets. And he's stuck. And in the end, that whole project fell over and he lost all the money that he put into it. Another chap that I know, he's very, very passionate about beef jerky. That might be your thing. It might not. That's beside the point. He's passionate about it. There are people that love it. There's a business there. but he rents where he lives. So he didn't want to put a commercial kitchen into his house, and he's not big enough, and he doesn't have the resources to get a special dedicated commercial facility. So what does he do? The entrepreneurial brain, he's a problem solver. He goes, you know what? I can build a trailer that's mobile that I can tow behind my car that meets all of the requirements and all of the criteria of a commercial kitchen. So he does that. Stainless steel, done to spec, all proper. He has been waiting since he finished the trailer. He's been waiting over a year, and he still doesn't have the tick of approval to start using this commercial kitchen. Not because there's problems with it, but just because they haven't given him the approval yet. Again, you multiply that by sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish up.
I was just going to say, again, you multiply that by thousands and thousands of people across Australia, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people across Australia, and you begin to get the picture of just how much we're missing out on.
But I think that brings up two really interesting points, which is like, one, particularly as libertarians, right? We kind of think as like government is this big, amorphous, like giant of a thing. But really what government actually is all these little tiny departments fighting each other for their share of the revenue, right? It's actually this little its own, cosm of existence.
These little fiefdoms, each with their own little petty chief who wants to one up the other petty chiefs. That's what it is.
Exactly. They don't want it. They're actually very disharmonious, right? They're fighting the other departments because they want their share of the budget. So I think that's a really interesting point. A lot of people probably don't think about. It's like, yes, we've got to, really sort of look at government in a different way that how we're used to. It's not this big giant corporation, it's actually a bunch of little different things. And I think the other point is that, sorry.
No, go for it.
And I think the other point is that, these things, they're very difficult. And I think we've really got to look at it in very specific ways and sort of trying to generalize it and make it like, it's just this, it's just that. Doesn't really attack the issue. It's like once you multiply this and that and this and that and all these different areas, it gets very complicated and people really can't keep up with it. Yeah. I mean, you even saw the ABC not paying their staff enough. It's like, do you think they're doing that because they have some ideological disposition to fair pay or whatever? No, it's because it's that difficult to keep up with these laws that even the ABC, a government department, can't even pay its staff fairly.
Yeah. I see that Wasp has finally started using his true name. Douche Nozzle. Yeah, okay. Sure, whatever floats your boat, mate. Cigars and whiskey, nice. Yes, indeed. So look, we don't realize what we're costing ourselves in that area alone. And I think that is actually the key to we're in a Gordian knot, right? We're trapped. You can't unpick one part of the knot because if you try and reduce welfare, people won't vote for you. If you try and cut taxes without reducing welfare, you make the fiscal position even worse. And you're not actually helping. You're not actually making it any better. I think that the red tape issue is the key to undoing that knot. You cut the red tape. Yeah, people are going to scream. People are going to get angry. People are going to say, but what about the spotted frog? Whatever. Okay, get this. Let me give you one example, right? On environmentalism specifically. And on environmentalism, if you want to know why I am so cynical towards most environmentalism, read the academic book by Professor Ainsley Kello from the University of Tasmania titled Science and Public Policy, The Virtuous Corruption of Virtual Environmental Sciences. I'm not going to go into what's in there, but read it and you will understand where I'm coming from. It's Professor Ainsley Kello, Science and Public Policy, The Virtuous Corruption of Virtual Environmental Sciences. That is possibly the single most influential book. It's not a book, it's an academic, it's a chunky thing that I've ever read. Most people have never heard of it. It's incredibly obscure, incredibly powerful, and it changed my thinking in really radical ways. But let me give you an example in the real world rather than an academic one. One of the hurdles that we had to cross with this go-karting center was the fact that they found in a couple of ditches, there were some ditches beside the road that had water in them. They also had like tires and shopping trolleys and other things in them as well. But they found in those ditches a fish called a dwarf galaxius. Now, this fish is listed as endangered, despite the fact that you can buy it in aquariums. I'm going to say that again. You can buy it in aquariums, right? Because this fish was found on the site, we have already had to spend $250,000 building a massive fuck-off fish pond. It's a massive lake area with all the native grasses and all the stuff that you have to do. It's around about 3/4 of an acre in size, just to give you some idea of the magnitude of this fish pond that we had to build on the site. And then when it was finished, we had to go and buy, I'm going to say it again, buy from an aquarium these supposedly endangered fishies and then stick them in the habitat. And as part of the condition of us being on that site, we have to check the water quality regularly and make sure that those fishies are still there. And if they die, guess what we have to do? Go and buy some more from the people that are breeding them commercially, and they're available from an effing fish shop, aquarium shop, and stick them back in there again. Right? This is madness. This is like, it doesn't insane. Even make any sense. It's not even achieving an environmental goal.
No. And that's like, some people sometimes when I in these things, like they'll give me a bit of flack for laughing. It's like, as I said earlier, it's like, if you don't laugh at this kind of thing, you're going to cry at it because it's absolutely insane. Right. And it's just, but the thing is, like, there's no real rational view. It's not like someone sat there and decided, all right, well, you know, Topher's opening this thing and he's got to get this amount of fish, right? It's just this pile on of like this regulation and then this regulation and then this regulation and this regulation. And then after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long it's been, all these regulations mean there's this insane amount of things you actually need to do that to actually get anything done. But the thing is, like, and that's one of the things I liked about Trump, and that's one of the things we've got in our, you know, I'm not saying I'm a Trump guy, but one of the things we've got in our policies as well is that for every one regulation that comes in, you've got to get rid of two, right? Because a lot of these things you don't even know about. There's this ancient, they've been on the books for ages and no one's really ever looked at them before. And so it's like, all right, well, if you want to bring in a regulation, let's get rid of two that don't make any sense that are still here. And I totally agree with that. And I think that's a great place to start. I think it needs more than that, but I think that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, it's a starting point. And this comes back to what I was saying before. Looking at the reality of what's politically possible. People that would go to you and say, oh, well, you've been elected, you've been a South Australian upper house member for 1 year. Why haven't you fixed everything? Well, because not everything's on the table. Not everything's actually fixable by a politician or even a group of politicians. Incrementalism is how we got into this mess. And as frustrating as it is, incrementalism is going to have to be how we actually get out of this. I'd make this point as well. And I'm sorry, I'm aware that I've been talking a lot, and I will hand back to you and let you sprue it for voters in just a minute. But I am really genuinely morally concerned about the fact that in Australia, at law, in a courtroom, ignorance of the law is no excuse. We all know that, right? Ignorance of the law is not an excuse under the law. And that's fair enough. That's how it has to be. You can't be in the courtroom going, well, I didn't know I wasn't allowed to kill him, Your Honor, so therefore I'm not responsible. No. Ignorance of the law can't be an excuse. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But when you have that rule in a society where it is not possible to know the law, we have tens of thousands of pages of laws and another hundreds of thousands of pages of regulations. And then if you really want to know what's going on, you've got to keep up with all of the court judgments that give you insight into how those rules and regulations are being interpreted by the courts. It is simply not possible for any human being to know this. And yet ignorance is no excuse. I find that to be genuinely immoral. I find our entire system, for as long as that state of affairs exists, we have an inherently unjust system, in my opinion.
I mean, that's exactly right? I've had the displeasure of reading court judgments in law school, and they're not fun to read. I mean, some of them are kind of like a little bit fun, as far, you know, maybe that's just me as a bit of a law nerd, but for most people, they're probably not very fun to read, right? They're written in language that most people don't really speak in and most people don't really understand. And they're sort of, you know, it's like you read it, but it sort of makes sense. But when you actually apply it in the context of what it's supposed to mean, it doesn't really make sense. And also the other thing that I think you've brought up, which is very important, is the fact that regulations don't actually go before Parliament. It's like, yes, Parliament can override them. There's a lot of sort of technicality behind them. But regulations are decided by a bunch of bureaucrats, a bunch of people we didn't elect, and they basically stopped a lot of businesses from happening ever. There are a bunch of people we've never elected, and it doesn't matter whether you vote for Labor or Liberal or the Greens or whoever, they're still going to be there. And it's going to take a long time of a lot of successive governments that are actually committed to getting rid of this sort of, I like to say, a lot of people call it the deep state or whatever. I don't really like to buy into that language. But in a way, there's a truth behind that, right?
The career bureaucrats. So the deep state is attached to all sorts of conspiracy theories, but the career bureaucracy are a problem.
Yes. And that's going to take a long time to really flush that out properly. And it's going to take a lot of successive governments that are actually committed to removing those things. And I think that's where minor parties such as ourselves, and not just ourselves, like as we've said many times, and I'm always happy to give a shout out to other freedom-friendly minor parties, but just all of them, we really need to work together and remove this kind of deep entrenched problem that is within our government. And a lot of it is not actually the government itself. It's bureaucrats and other departments and all this sort of excess of government that really needs to be weeded out. And I think it's really important that we get onto those things very quickly, because it can quickly go out of control. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, once you realize it's a problem, it's probably too late. Yeah,
exactly. And what's the point that I make, and to bring it back to the election, okay, because that is why I asked you on. So, in fairness to you, I know we should be talking more about that. Our politicians,
I'm happy to talk about
our politicians are the symptom. We are the problem, right? And we need to accept that. We need to accept responsibility for what's happened in our country. It is a combination of us voting for the lesser of two evils and being apathetic about politics, not paying attention, going into the booth, ticking a box and shoving it in there and forgetting about it until the next election. We are the problem. And fixing it, like you said, is good night, Ben Cove. Thanks for joining us. Like you said, fixing is going to take a very...
He's in the SA team of the LibDems. So.
Oh, nice. Thanks, okay, cool. Fixing this is going to take a long time. It was really interesting. So I was involved in the fight against all the mandates and the lockdowns, etc., in Victoria, as you know. And we were staging...
Well done, Topher. You deserve a lot of praise.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'd been staging fortnightly or monthly protests that were achieving... So we were chipping away. Okay, we were chipping away. We were continuing to have successful protests in spite of all of what was being done to us. And then there came a moment where all of a sudden the CFMEU fired up, right? And they held daily protests, and they were there chanting every day. Okay, great. I love your passion, but I'm sorry, that's not sustainable. You can't do that. And they held, I think, 4 days worth of protests, maybe 3 days worth of protests. And then, of course, the federal government, the state government infamously brought out the armored vehicles, the rubber bullets, the anti-terror squad, etc., and shot at them.
People at Victoria Police, right?
There to protect and serve the shit out of you.
Uphold the right. Uphold the right.
Oh, yeah, uphold the right. Yeah, exactly. Up. What was that? Uphold the right. Yeah.
That's a motto.
Yeah. So, but what happened was after 4 days, they went home, and I talked to some of them, and I knew some of them, and I said, because what happened? If you've watched the documentary Battleground Melbourne, you'll know this story. We all went home. Like I went home as well.
Well done.
Thank you. And we're like, okay, what's next? Like, is this it? Or is it over now? And then the nurses and the teachers and so forth started staging their silent protests in uniform, etc., and kept the fight going. But I spoke to a lot of really disillusioned people that were CFMEU members that had arced up for those protests, and then they went, "We held 4 days of protests and nothing changed. What? How can this be?" I've spoken to people that showed up for that massive protest in Canberra, and they've spoken to me afterwards, or they've sent me messages afterwards. They're like, well, obviously the protest didn't achieve anything because we showed up in massive numbers and nothing changed. I'm like, well, hang on, guys. This isn't the work of a moment. This is the work of a lifetime. Welcome to the suck. This war is never going to end. It'll still be going long after you are dead. Your children and your grandchildren will still be involved in this fight to get freedom from their own governments. Because even if we were to win, whatever that looks like, and create a libertarian society, there are going to be people who try and drag it back the other way. This fight is ongoing. It doesn't end. And so your point that this is going to take a long time to undo what's been done, I think is more important than most people realize. We all need to understand, and we all need to set ourselves up so that we're in this for the long haul, not just for a quick one and done. One election, oh, that didn't work. Oh, well, I guess whatever.
Yeah. What I think the left wing does very well that we could learn from, and I'm not trying to outcast any people who are more left leaning. I love to bring them in, right? But is that they convert that, they love protests, right? But they convert it into political action, right? They get councillors elected, they get state representatives elected. And the thing is, we've got to do the same. It's one thing to shout in the street, and I'm not downplaying any protest movement. They're very important. But you've got to convert that into something more than just shit.
Yeah, it plays a role. The protests play a role. And Matthew, thank you. Good. Thank you. I've had to take a step back. I don't know how often you watch, but if you know my sort of story, I've had to take a step back for my own sake. But and Jessica says it here. Good on you, Matthew. Thank you. I appreciate you doing. I appreciate everyone that's been to Canberra. I haven't.
Yes.
Oh, Michael, that's fantastic.
Well, quickly, like watching Battleground Melbourne. Watching Battleground Melbourne made me realize, there's so many things, and I was from Melbourne. The stuff that happened in Melbourne quite closely, but there were so many things I forgot about until I watched that documentary again. It's like, can I swear on here? It's like, holy shit! It's like, I forgot that happened, and that was such a huge thing, and it happened, and we all forgot about it. So thank you for putting that all in one. What was it? 2 hour or one and a half documentary that we could all watch.
100 minutes. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. And thank you to everyone that made that possible. That was only possible through the crowdfunding support that paid for it. But we have to accept this reality. This battle was going on long before we were born, and it will be going on long after we're dead. It is our responsibility to do what we can in our generation and in our time. We can't control what happened before we were born, and we can't control what happens after we die, but we can influence what happens while we're here. And people like yourself are taking up that mantle and going, okay, I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to do what I can while I'm here to try and move the needle in some sort of a way. So let's talk about this, because protests are absolutely important. I've been at a bunch of them. I'm on charges of incitement. I'm up in,
Yes, you have. Yes, you've committed to it more than I have.
I'm an accused criminal right now because I was encouraging people to exercise their human right to political protest. And that the current court date is late this month, but it may get adjourned again because we're waiting on the results of some court cases in the Victorian Supreme Court. So we'll see how that plays out. That's neither here nor there. Yeah. But I'm being treated as a criminal for encouraging people to exercise their human right to engage in political protest. Protesting is important, and it was important enough to me to take that risk, right? But it's not the be-all and end-all. We have to see it translate into political outcomes. Yes. And this is actually, James, this is where I get a little bit worried, because we've seen hundreds of thousands of people engage in protest on the streets of Melbourne. We've seen massive crowds in Canberra, like phenomenal crowds in Canberra. Amazing to see. If we don't see something different at the ballot box, at the South Australian election, at the federal election, at the Victorian election, then what does that say about the movement? And what does that say about us?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's like, and I don't want to sort of cause any sort of drift or tension or anything like that, but it's like the thing that frustrates me the most being a political candidate, and even before I was a political candidate, it's like, oh, you know what? It's just not worth it. The people who are like, I'm just going to cross a line through all the names and say, it doesn't count. It's like, you know what? If you're going to do that, then you might as well just cast a blank ballot, right? Because there's absolutely no difference between the two of them. Right. If you want to cast an informal ballot, fine. Right. I think that's a real big waste of your time. Like, I don't believe in compulsory voting. I think people should have the choice to vote, but we live in a society where compulsory voting is the law. So if you're going to do it, well, you might as well put some effort into it and actually vote properly. But that's the thing. It's like, I shouldn't have to be fighting against those people. I should have to be fighting against Liberal and Labor and, and those and the Greens and those people. Right. But I've 100%. Got to fight them. But I've also got to fight people who are so disenfranchised. And I get it, right? Don't get me wrong. I totally get it. I've done it before, right? Mm-hmm. I've crossed the lines out in the names in a ballot and cast that as a ballot before. I've done it. But it frustrates me so much to be like, I need to fight them on their front. I've also got to fight the people who are so disenfranchised that they just cannot fathom the idea of voting formally ever again in their life, which I totally get, as I said, but frustrating for me.
It doesn't help. This is the thing that I ask people, because I get a lot of people in my inbox. I get, so for those of you that are waiting on a reply from me, I'm so sorry. I get over 100 emails a day. I get it. On top of that, I get another 50 messages via Facebook and Instagram and other things. And I'm sorry, a lot of it just doesn't get looked at. I'm sorry. That's just the reality. I've got someone who looks at my emails. If you want to get through to me, do it via my emails, via my website, topherfield.net. Okay, that's the best way to do it, because it does actually get looked at, and then some things get referred to me and other things get addressed by the person that helps me with that. But one of the things I share your frustration. These people that turn around and they want to say there's no point. That's ultimately what they're saying. There's no point. They have different ways of saying it. They use different language, but ultimately what they're saying is there is no point. And my question to them is, okay, what's your alternative? And I bring it back to something I used to tell. I used to be a salsa dancing teacher, just teaching like beginner classes and that sort of stuff. I was never elite. This is back when I was young and beautiful and skinny. Long time ago. Next time
I come to Melbourne, we should salsa dance together.
Excellent. All right. Are you going to be the lead or the follow? Because I can do both.
Whatever. You're the teacher. You're the teacher.
I can do both. I had to teach both. So, but I would have people come to me at the class, and they were beginners, okay? And they would come to me and they'd say, "Look, we've been watching you dance and do all your demos and everything else. It's like, this is amazing. How long have you been dancing for?" And I'd say, "Oh, I've been dancing for 3 years." And I'd watch this look on their face, this disappointment, this like, oh, really? It takes that long? Like they didn't say that, but that's the look on their face. Yeah. And I would say to them, well, hang on. Do you plan to be dead in 3 years? They kind of be a little bit shocked. They're like, what? No. Do you plan to be dead in 3 years' time? And they're like, no. Good. Okay. So you plan to be alive. Unless some unforeseen thing happens, you plan to still be alive on this planet. Okay, great. Do you want to be alive and good at dancing, or do you want to be alive and still at the same level that you're at right now? Right? That's your choice. You can put the work in between now and then, and in 3 years' time, when you plan to still be alive, you can be as good or better than me. I'm not some amazing dancer, right? It took me time to learn it. You might be better than me in 3 years, but you're not going to know unless you put the work in. And it's the same thing with politics right now. Do you plan to be dead in 10 years? All right. Well, if you plan to be alive in 10 years, do you want to be living in a country that is even worse than what it is right now, that has turned into Venezuela, because we could get there? There's nothing magical about us that means we can't get there. All right. Or do you want to be alive in 10 years' time and living in a place that's better than it is now, freer than it is now? Okay. Are you willing to do the work? That's the question. Now, let's talk about the work, James. What is it? I tell people to volunteer all the time. I tell people, become a member, a financial member of whichever freedom-friendly political party you want to join, and then volunteer. You've been campaigning. You're almost at the end of it. You're probably exhausted. I'm amazed you even gave me any of your time, to be honest, because you must be knackered. So thank you.
No problem.
What do you need volunteers to do? What is it that volunteers do?
Well, the first thing before we even get into volunteers is like, just do a political audit, right? That's what I call it anyway. Every sort of 3 to 5 years in that window, look at all the parties, right? The major parties are usually pretty easy to keep up with because the press keeps up with them pretty well. But at least the minor parties, look at them every 3 to 5 years and be like, all right, which parties do I align with? And look at all of them and be like, make a little bit of a ranking system of which parties you align with. And do that, right? It's maybe 2 hours out of your life for every 5 years, right?
Yeah.
I've worked long hours. I know that 2 hours is a lot more than it sounds, but if you average that out, it's like what, I don't know, a couple of minutes a day, so it's not really that hard to do. But beyond that, find the party that you like, whether it's me and the Liberal Democrats, whether it's One Nation, whether it's UAP, who's not contesting the state election, but in the federal election, whether it's
and the Victorian state election,
Australian Family Party, yes, and some independent, whatever. Even if it's the Greens, right? Like, I don't really care. Just find the party you like.
Get active.
Get active in them. Yes, I don't like the idea of paying money to join a political party, right? I'm a libertarian. I don't like the idea of collectivism. I'm an individualist. But, we've all got to compromise to some degree, right? So find the party you like, pay the whatever it is, $50 to $100. In Liberal Democrats, $80 a year.
Yeah.
If you're a concession member, it's $40. Pay whatever it is. get active within the party and do what you can, right? Whatever, find your area that you like, right? And get active in that sense. If you're big on campaigning, get active in the campaign team. I was a policy wonk. That's what I am, and that's what I'll always be. So I got active in the policy committee. Do what you got to do, and make that happen. And it's like, I get it. Not everyone can commit their whole life to politics, and we all want to get away from politics. I don't want to be a politician. No one wants to do that, but we've got to give some of our time, because the thing is, freedom, you don't just get it, right? You've got to work for it, and it sucks, but that's the reality of it. You've got to actually put in some time to get that, and just find your party, find what you like, pressure them. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, right? Sometimes political parties, particularly minor parties, are not very organized, and you've got to actually push them a little bit to be able to even give, even if you're a very active person who wants to volunteer for them, you've got to push them, but push them. And you know what? Yeah. The thing is, you can actually move within that party quite quickly a lot. Correct. If that's your passion.
Correct.
And look at me. I joined the party midway through last year, and now I'm the lead candidate. It's that simple. I'm not saying that that's what everyone should do and that's what everyone wants to do, but that's how easy it is. There's a lot of opportunities in these parties to become what you want to become and to pursue what you want to pursue.
Can I just say, my observation is the number one thing that all of these minor parties need, the Liberal Democrats included, no offense to anyone, but I include the Liberal Democrats in this, but UAP, One Nation, the whole lot, the number one thing they need is administrative support. They need people willing to check emails and say, here is the email address where all of our volunteers are sending their information. I'm going to put them into a spreadsheet. I'm going to email them back and find out where they live. I'm going to look up which polling booths they're closest to, and I'm going to schedule them to be on the different polling booths to hand out how to vote cards, etc. Like, it's actual basic administrative support. And the reason they need it is this. It's incredibly time consuming, and these minor parties are cash poor, which means they're time poor. They can't pay people to do this stuff. And also, often administration is not the strength of someone who's passionate about politics or passionate about policy. Administration is a different skill set. It's a different mindset, a different way of thinking to someone like yourself who might be a policy wonk, or someone like myself who's more of a communications and PR sort of a person. That's where I'm inclined. I'm hopeless administratively. And what these parties need more than anything is people to come along and go, right, you guys desperately need some administrative support. You might be 20 years or 30 years as an EA. You might have spent time in the corporate world. You might have spent time wherever you've spent time. Maybe you're semi-retired, or maybe you're just young and this is your strength. This is just what you're good at. Volunteer, and don't get annoyed at them for being unorganized. Get in there and say, hey guys, I can help you be more organized. That's what's needed for most, if not all, of these minor parties right now, in my opinion.
Exactly. Most people don't realize, right? Like, the whole SA team of the Liberal Democrats, as far as I'm aware at least, and I'm quite sure I know, is all volunteer, right? There's no one who gets paid, right? And that's, I love my team. They do a lot of work for me, and they're great, and I have so much praise to give to them. But the thing is, this is why the major parties are the major parties, and this is why the minor parties are the minor parties, because the major parties pay all these people to be not to be volunteers, but to be staff members in their party, and make sure that they, Liberal, Labour, the Greens, they attend every single polling booth in South Australia, right? All 771 polling booths they will be at, right? And all the pre-polling booths, which is, I don't know, we got 200, they'll be at all of them too for the 2 weeks leading up to election, right? And people think that's kind of pointless, but that actually means a lot, right? Giving out how to vote cards actually wins a lot of votes, right?
It's worth it.
Like us. Yeah, go ahead.
The studies have been done on this because my internet's just gone down.
You're good now.
Okay, we're back. Be okay. Getting people handing out how to vote cards is worth 2 to 3% of the vote for a minor party. Now, that may not sound like much, but when getting a Senate seat is 8.33%, if you've got someone handing out how to votes for the LibDems, there's 2 to 3% there. Then someone doing it for One Nation, there's 2 to 3% there. Now you're talking 4 to 6% just between those two. And if they preference each other, which they are, then all of a sudden that can be the difference between getting a senator or not. And that's massive.
In 2018, The person who filled the last quota got 3.5%. Right? That's about 40,000 votes, roughly, in South Australia. So that's all it takes, which is like, I get it. 40,000 people is a lot of people. I'm not going to pretend like that's nothing, but it's not that much as well, right?
It's not.
So it's like you've got to really look at this, and find your party and really volunteer, because it does mean a lot. It really, and I know I'm on the ground. I do this stuff, right? It means a lot. The fact that I've got these volunteers means so much more than the campaign we had in 2018 when we didn't have these volunteers.
Yeah.
Right. And if in 2026 we have even more volunteers, that's going to mean so much more than this campaign. Yeah.
100%. Is it too late for people to volunteer? For South Australian viewers, is it too late for them to get on board and help? What should they do?
No.
Do they send an email somewhere? What do they do? How do they sign up?
Send an email to me personally. My email address is james.hol, HOL, @ldp.org.au. Send an email to me.
Put that in the comments.
Yes, please.
All right, james.hol, HOL, @ldp.org.au.
Yes.
.org.au. Okay. If you're in South Australia, or if you can get to South Australia for this Saturday, send an email, volunteer, and say, hey, which polling booth do you need me to stand on? Bring yourself some water, bring yourself some snacks, and bring yourself some sunscreen, an umbrella if you need it, or a raincoat. I don't know what the weather's going to be. Make sure that you can be out there and actually helping, because it does make a difference.
Just a few hours. Even if it's just a few hours. That means a lot. And the thing is, also another part of this aspect is, right, the major parties, so this is how it works in South Australia. I imagine it's largely the same in others. The exact percentage might be different, but it's largely the same in other states and federally. Is that if you get in the upper house in South Australia, if you get over 2% of the primary vote, you get your money back. So everything you spent on core flutes, everything you spent on posters, flyers, how to vote cards, any of that material, you get it all paid back by the taxpayer, which I totally disagree with, by the way, but that's the system we live under, right? So that's why major parties stay major parties. They can spend millions of dollars putting out core flutes because they know they're going to get 2% back in the upper house, 4% back in the lower house, and they're going to get that all paid back by the taxpayer. So essentially, their whole campaign is funded by the taxpayer. Right. And that's why major and minor parties struggle, because if they don't hit that threshold, they're not going to get that money back. And you spent $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, whatever it is. And that's gone, which for a minor party is a lot of money. For a major party, $20,000 is nothing. But for a minor party, $20,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but you would have done a fair bit of self-funding of this campaign yourself. I mean, has this cost you money out of pocket?
Yeah, I quit my job.
Yeah.
So this is what people do.
Yep.
Yeah. I sold my crypto. I sold my stocks. I sold a lot of like physical assets that I had. And like for me to run alone costs $3,000, right? Which is actually the highest in the country in South Australian Legislative Council. Yeah. So for me to just put the deposit down to run is $3,000, which I know that's not like a whole lot of money, but that still
depends on where you're at.
Money to just sort of have a look around. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then more than that, again, to fund my campaign and, print a lot of material. And, I've had a few events where I paid for drinks and that stuff doesn't get repaid by the taxpayers, thankfully. But, those kind of things.
Yeah.
It's part of the campaign. The thing is, the parties have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And we've got, I can tell you, we've got tens of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. And WASP has taken a break from trolling and actually made a good point here. The major parties are using our money in an extremely disgraceful way. I wholeheartedly agree. He goes on to say, or she, I actually don't know who it is, that they spend more on market research than we can imagine. Yes, and this is part of the problem. They're weather vanes. They follow the polls, and they've got the money to do all the focus groups and the polling and all that sort of stuff relentlessly, not just at election time. They're constantly doing it. It's absolutely disgraceful. Now, we do have a good suggestion here from Michael. If Grid Girls handed out how to vote cards, just saying. I don't know. I don't know how many Grid Girls.
If I could train a dog to hand out how to vote, if I could train a dog to hand out how to vote.
Well, this is the worst news. This is the worst news I've had all night. It's a crying shame. Thank you, Kate, for ruining my night. So this is what people don't realize. And I've spoken a few times. I'm on a trip. I went inland through Griffith and Dubbo, etc., Tamworth up to Brizzy. And then I came down mostly down the coast. And I'm on my way back to Melbourne now via Albury. I'll be at the stand. Excuse me. I'll be at the stand in the park in Albury on Sunday morning. If that's your thing, if you're in that area, come and see me. And I've been speaking to a few different groups along the way, and they invariably ask me, what can we do? How are we going to fix this problem? Right? How are we going to fix this problem that we've got in this country? And I say, you're not going to like my answer because it's incredibly boring. Right?
Yeah.
It's boring. Go and join a political party. Go and hand out how to vote cards. Go and stuff letterboxes with political campaign material. It's boring. But what most people also don't appreciate is that tyranny is incredibly boring. Look at what happened to us in the last 2 years. It was just paperwork. People in power filled out bits of paper and put their signature on documents, and our lives got ruined for 2 years. Right? I'm sorry, this is just how the real world works. If you want to be James Bond doing like sexy counterterrorism stuff on some remote island somewhere with a Bond girl on the side, well, I'm sorry, that's not reality. There's a reason we pay money to watch those in movies, because it's a fantasy. In reality, tyranny is incredibly boring, and the solution is equally boring. Sign up, pay the money, become a member, hand out how to vote cards. You and everyone else that does the same thing are actually making a difference. Now, I want to get your thoughts. I want to get your thoughts on this, James. Wasp has responded. He said, "I'm not trolling. I just see liberalism as traitorous." Well, I've got to ask you, Wasp, what is your definition of liberalism? Because in America, a liberal is a very different thing to what it is in the UK. Yeah. Is a very different thing to what it is in the UK, and is a very different thing to what it was 150 years ago. The word liberal is one of the most misused and abused words and can mean whatever. So I don't know what you mean by that. I don't call myself a liberal. I call myself a libertarian.
Get scared. The idea of the liberal
Democrats, that's right.
The most beautiful thing.
Liberals and Democrats, those are both like, we do not align with that at all. I'm actually kind of glad that the Liberal Democratic Party are going to have to drop the word liberal. I actually think it's a toxic word.
But I actually agree with you. I actually agree with you a lot.
Yeah. I actually think it's a toxic word, and I'm glad that they're going to have to move away from using that, because it's been so misused over the years. But if you think I'm a traitor, well, that's an interesting take on things. If you think I'm a liberal in the American sense of the word, well, that's an even more interesting take on things. But all I want, brilliant. Just keep posting, mate. Just keep posting. Just keep feeding the algorithm, please.
Thanks,
okay.
Wasp.
Yeah, thanks, Wasp. So Tim says, actually, joining the Liberal Democrats has proven to be more fun than I thought it would be. Good to hear, Tim. Really, really good to hear that. James says East Germany was like a place where everything was run by the post office, even the sleaze. Is a quote from PJ O'Rourke, one of the great political comedians of our time. Liberalism in the US is progressivism, and I would rather use the word progressive to define that particular form of thinking. I think that captures it better. Okay, so we've talked about the South Australian situation. We've touched briefly on some of the federal stuff and what needs to be done. We've talked about campaigns. We've talked about what people can do to make a bit of a difference. I want to take a deep breath and kind of get out of the weeds and get into the higher level stuff and talk a little bit about. We talk about freedom. We talk about being a libertarian. We talk about what even is that? What are we even talking about when we talk about libertarianism? I know I have a lot of people that have joined my page in the last 2 years because they see me as the anti-lockdowns, anti-vaccine mandates guy, right? Well, that's a part of what I am, but I am that because of my stance as a libertarian, as someone who believes in freedom. So, James, how would you describe a libertarian? What is that?
Well, I think it's easy to be like, I'm against, I suppose it's not easy in some ways, but in other ways, it's easy to be like, I'm against vaccine mandates, right? Because a lot of your audience that are here are probably going to 100% agree with me on that. Like, it's easy to say I'm against lockdowns because a lot of your audience are probably also going to 100% agree with me on that. But the thing is, it's not as easy to say, I agree with, decriminalizing sex work, or I agree with, decriminalizing drug use, right? But it's the same, it's the same concept. And I think it's really important that people look at it in the same way. It's like one of the real big issues And what led me to actually run for office and be here and talking to you right now is the fact that bodily autonomy is such an important aspect, right? If I can't control what I do with my body, then I'm not free. And that means if I want to smoke a joint, or if I want to, if I want to snort cocaine, then that's, I should be free to do that. I'm not saying that's a great thing to do. I'm not trying to advocate using drugs. But the reality is that it's not my job, it's not the government's job to tell people what is morally correct. What the government should do is set a groundwork of, if you harm someone else, there should be punishment. I agree with that. We're not anarchists. Right? I agree with that. But the reality is communities, families, and individuals should be regulating morality. It's not the government's job to regulate my morality. It's not the government's job to regulate someone else's morality. Right? As soon as you start going down that path, and I get the temptation, like let's look at, say, vaccine stuff, because I think that's very topical, right? So it's like a very big temptation is sort of to go down the Florida route or the DeSantis route, which is like, let's outlaw private businesses having vaccine mandates. It's like, I get it. I totally get that. I can see why people want to do that. But the reality is, what you do is you actually create more problems, right? You stamp the foot of government down on these businesses, and it actually creates more. I want to know the businesses that don't want to serve me because I'm unvaccinated. I want to know them so I can never patronize them again, right? I want them, like if anyone's watched Inglourious Bastards, right? Like I don't want them to take the uniform off. I don't want them to have that ability to take the uniform off and act like they're prejudiced against because they took the uniform off. It's like, no, I want to wear your colors on your sleeve so I can say I'm never going to go to your premises again. I totally disagree with what you're saying, and I'm never going to support you. And I want to know those people. I don't want them to be able to hide under regulations and pretend that if I would love to not serve unvaccinated people, but you know what, I just have to. No. Put them out in the open. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Let them be who they're going to be, and I will never support them.
Right. So you broke up a little bit again there, but I'm just moving my phone around. I'm getting a warning from my computer telling me that my internet connection isn't great. So I apologize. There's unfortunately nothing I can do about that. Someone asked the question earlier in the thread. Yeah, wow. I haven't even got 4G. I've got nothing. I've got no 5G, no 4G, no 3G. I'm on the H plus symbol at the moment, so I don't know why. Someone asked earlier, why didn't you go to a hotel with good Wi-Fi? Well, I went to a hotel that advertised they had Wi-Fi. Turns out their Wi-Fi is trash, right? And they don't tell you that in the advertising on the website. We have Wi-Fi, but it's trash. All right, they don't add that little clause there. Daniel Turner assures me that I'm legible. So good. This is the thing, James, and you've touched on it there. Everyone is a libertarian in at least one area. And by that, what I mean is this. Everyone agrees that the government has gone too far in at least one area. Everyone's got that one bugbear that they're like, oh, the government shouldn't be involved in that. They shouldn't be doing that, right? Now, for some people, it may be refugees. For some people, it's drugs. For some people, it's taxes. For some people, it's welfare. For some people, it's red tape or green tape or what have you. We've all got these different things. And every single one of them, even when I was a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, a very different person politically to what I am today, I still had these areas where I was like, no, the government shouldn't be involved in that. People make the mistake of thinking that conservatism is for small government. No, it's not. They just have a different list of things that the government should or should not do. And progressives, what we would call the left of politics, the Greens, etc., they have a different list of things that the government the government shouldn't be involved. I oppose the idea that people are being thrown in prison simply for the crime of making, selling, or consuming substances. I oppose that. Now, I've never had any of those substances. Quite literally, the only drugs I've had in my life have been paracetamol, what's the other one? Ibuprofen, alcohol, and got them. All right, I'm going to hold my phone away from my computer and hope that improves the reception. Benjamin, great comment. Benjamin has said, Topher mustn't be vaccinated, otherwise his 5G would work better. Yeah. Okay.
I'm unvaccinated. My 5G works great.
So
I'm just going to say that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Look, where I am, there just mustn't be enough towers around where I am. Anyway, all we're doing as libertarians is we're saying, if we believe in the power of individual choice, individual agency, you get to make your decisions for you, then we should apply that principle across all areas, not just the ones that we like. So I'm in favor of freedom, even in areas where I don't like it. I don't like the idea that people around me are taking ice or taking cocaine. I'm not a fan of that idea. But the idea that we should throw people in prison for that makes no sense to me at all. The idea that the government should be involved in that makes no sense to me at all. And that's what makes a libertarian a libertarian. We apply this principle of freedom. When you became a libertarian, did you find yourself changing your mind on different issues progressively? Or was it kind of an all-in-one kind of an epiphany where you changed your whole worldview?
I think it's like, yes, I think in a way it was an epiphany, but you kind of don't realize them in real time until you actually go through them one by one, and like, oh, right, okay, I'm going to apply this principle here, and that leads to this inevitable outcome. But I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's so tempting. Like, I totally get it. I do totally get it. Where it's like, just put the boot down and be like, I don't like this, so I'm going to get the government to put the boot down and make sure this doesn't happen. But the reality is, it doesn't work, right? We've seen it. Say, like, let's look at alcohol prohibition in the US. That totally, and alcohol has a lot of problems, right? I'm drinking it right now. I'm not going to lie. Like, we all enjoy alcohol, but it has a lot of problems too. And if we could eliminate all the problems to do with alcohol just like that, that'd be great. But the reality is we can't, right? Is if we try and do that, then we lead to all these other problems that actually make alcohol use worse. And that's what we saw during prohibition in the US. And the exact same can be applied to drug prohibition. 100%. The exact same can be applied to a lot of things as well. And I think we've got to resist that temptation to be like, oh, well, I'll get them back. I'll show them. I'll, put the boot down harder in this area. But no, that's not the answer. The answer is to be like, all right, you know what? I don't agree with what this person is doing, but they've got to find that problem and find that solution in their own time and through their own communities, through their family, and not through the boot of the government, because the boot of the government usually leads to worse problems than what the problem you are actually trying to eliminate is.
And this can be seen in many of the policies that I am embarrassed to say I used to support. So I used to support Johnny Howard. Anything Johnny Howard wanted to do, I was all over it, right? Johnny Howard was number 3 in the universe. There was God, there was Jesus, and there was Johnny Howard, okay? And if Johnny Howard said something, then it had to be true. He had to be right. So when he banned guns, I was like, okay, well, looks like guns are a bad thing after all. Which was a bit of a shame because I think I was 16 at the time. No, I must have been young. I was 12 at the time. No, 14. That's right. 14 at the time. And I was looking forward to getting my gun license when I turned 18 and going rabbit shooting and stuff like that. But I was like, you know what? Johnny Howard said we have to get rid of them. So we have to get rid of all the semi-automatics. When he said we needed to increase the baby bonus, I was like, yes, good conservative values, make families have more kids. Yes. When he expanded the superannuation system, right, and said, right, we're gonna make it bigger. We're gonna, I was like, yes, you do that. Now I recognize all 3 of those things as having been terrible policy and having been terrible, terrible mistakes. He was good economically, but I think that was actually not so much John Howard. I think that was more the treasurer, Peter Costello, in my opinion. I don't think that was John Howard in reality. But he was terrible in so many other areas. But because I was a good conservative, I supported him on all of those things back then. And that progression, it took time. When we went into Iraq, yes. When we went into Afghanistan, yes. I was in favor, and I'm embarrassed to say it now, but that's just the truth. That's who I was at the time. And I recognize so many of those things that I celebrated back then, I recognize now were terrible things and were completely wrong and should never have been done. People have a hard time, though, accepting the idea of freedom for others. We all want freedom for ourselves, but people seem to struggle with this concept of freedom for others. I should be free to make my decisions because I'm smart and I can make good decisions, but you shouldn't be free to make your decisions because you're dumb and you can't make good decisions. Where does that come from, do you think?
I actually really hate this concept where it's like, oh, people are so stupid, right? This is so often thrown around from every side of the political, libertarians included. Every side of the political spectrum does this thing. It's like, people are so stupid. It's like, oh, but the implication is except for me, right? Everyone else is so stupid except for me. But if everyone says that, then no one is stupid.
That's right, except for me. Yeah.
Exactly. And I really hate that because I actually think it's
like, everyone is stupid, one or the other.
I just think it's like, all right, maybe Joe Blow from, Elizabeth or maybe Frankston and is the equivalent of Melbourne. It doesn't know how to quote, how to quote Ayn Rand or someone like that. But you know what? He knows how to plaster a drywall better than you. And what really matters in life?
Yep.
I would say plastering the drywall matters a lot more in life than quoting Ayn Rand. Right? So it's like, I actually think I really detest this idea that people are stupid. And I worked in hospitality for 10 years, right? So if anyone's got a license to say people are stupid, it's me.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's the case. I think people are very smart generally, and that's like, say, I got in a bit of a Twitter argument with Anthony Green about, about the Liberal Democrats and the confusion of the name and all that stuff. Right. Sure. And he was sort of saying, like, you know what, actually, like, I'm not just saying this because this is like a good thing for the party to say, right? People in the party have actually told me if you want to think people get confused with Liberal Party, go for it. Right. But I actually have a lot of trust in voters. I think people are smarter than that. I think people do understand the difference between the Liberals and Liberal Democrats, right? I think people are quite smart generally, right? Yes, they don't know every single thing in the world, but I think that people actually know a lot about more than a lot of people are willing to accept. And I think it's about time we empower those people and let those people make their decisions and let those people have their voices heard instead of trying to hush them up and push them away and push them to the side and quiet them up so that we can all have our proper thing that we're supposed to say. I think it's very important. I think ordinary Australians are great people in general. Yes, they're apathetic. Yes, there's some criticism I have. I'm not going to lie. But I think in general, ordinary Australians are great people. And that's one of the things I love about campaigning is that I get to meet ordinary Australians, in my case, ordinary South Australians, but I'm sure it's the same in other states. And I get to meet them and I actually have real conversations with them, not through the bias of the media or some other group that's in the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with most of that. Although I think James makes a good point here. He says, "I'm stupid, and I'm leery of others who don't realize that they are as well." There's that line in is it the movie The Incredibles? I think where you've got that villain who wanted to be a super, but he wasn't, so he turns into a super villain. And one of the lead characters says to him, "Oh, but we're all super." And he says, "That's just another way of saying that none of us are. If we're all special, that's just another way of saying that none of us are." So I have some sympathy for your point here, James. We're all stupid. But here's the thing, and it comes back to something you said earlier, James, when you were talking about the different levels of government and bringing the decision making down the levels of government to get the decisions to be made as close as possible to the people that are affected by those decisions. And there's a good example that gets given. If you're spending your money on something that you're buying for yourself, you're going to be quite careful about how you spend that money. You're going to make sure you're not spending too much money, and you're going to make sure you're spending it on something that's actually good and valuable for you because it's your thing, right? But if you're spending your money on a present for somebody else, you're going to be very careful about how much it costs, but you're not going to be as concerned about whether it's useful later on. And if you're spending other people's money on yourself, you won't care about the price. You'll just get the best possible thing that you think you can get away with. And finally, if you're spending other people's money on somebody else, you don't care about the price and you don't care about the product. And the reality of politics and bureaucracies in Australia today is that they are spending other people's money on other people. And they do not have skin in the game. They do not have a vested interest in the good use of that money or in the outcome of what that money actually achieves. And that's, in my opinion, how we get to where we are today. All the people with power are too far removed from the people that they're making decisions over. Now, James, I'm mindful that we've got a really crappy internet connection. I've been able to hear most of what you've said. I think most people have heard most of what we've said. But given the internet issues and given that we've been going for 2 hours and 20 minutes and I've got a long drive tomorrow, I think we might wind it up. But I want to give you a free kick, James. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we finish up for tonight?
Yeah, I think it's been said, but I think it's worth studying again. Right. I think it's very important that we convert what's happening because this is a real moment in history. You know, I'm only 28. Maybe I'm mistaking what's happening for, you know, sort of youthfulness or whatever. But I do genuinely believe that we have this real moment in history. And I'm not like, I'd love everyone in South Australia that's watching this to vote for me, but it's bigger than me. I would love for this thing that's happening right now in all of Australia, including South Australia, to turn into the sort of the bottom, you know, of what's happening and be like, you know what, this is what happens when we let everything go too far. And we can look at this and be like, all right, let's see that. And let's be like, we never want to do this again. Let's vote for people who champion freedom and let's vote and not just vote. Let's change the culture. Because it's bigger than voting, right? I believe in this. I think it's Andrew Breitbart who said this, that politics is downstream from culture, right? So let's change the culture. And let's make the idea of freedom good again. Like, you know, freedom, you know, there's the memes, right? It's like freedom, you know, FREEDUM, like freedom. It's like, no, freedom is worth fighting for. Freedom, you know, I'm doing this because of freedom. I'm giving up my life. I'm giving up my privacy because of freedom. And I think, you know, I'm not saying everyone is become a political candidate, but I think it's important we all do what we can to move this charge because there's a lot of movement behind this. And I think it's very important this gets directed in the right way. And I think we really have got to, and I'm not saying vote for me, but we've all got to do what we can in our own parties, in our own ways, you know, say for other, you know, say for media, people in media, like go, you know, make your own podcast. It's like, we all want to say, email Topher and say, let's go on your show, but make your own show, right? Become a new Topher. Right? I'm sure you don't find any offense in me telling your viewers.
No, not at all.
Become a new Topher, become a whatever, right? Make your own name for yourself and become the person in your community that is the freedom guy in your community, whether that's, you know, in your local community, whether that's in your hobby community, whatever it may be. There's so many opportunities people don't realize they have so much power in and they just let it go. I think it's very important that people empower themselves and move forward in their direction and promote the ideas of freedom and liberty and libertarianism and classical liberalism, whatever you want to call it, and actually make those things valuable and realize that those things are very much worth fighting for.
Yeah. Well said, James. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think that's the perfect place to leave it tonight. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're exhausted. I wish you all the very best on Saturday. For those that want to, that are in South Australia or can get to South Australia, you want to help, email james.hol, HOL, at ldp.org.au. And yeah, James says, make your own show at a time other than 8 p.m. Thursday. Yes, definitely. That's my time slot, damn it.
I'm actually on Channel 6 News with Leo Puglisi right now as well. I'm actually on Channel 6 News.
Okay, well, I hope you're recording it.
Yeah, it was recorded on Tuesday. You know, there's a little behind the scenes for everyone here.
Mate, thank you so much. And look, I really appreciate you stepping up and taking that responsibility because it sucks. Being a candidate sucks. It does. And I'm really grateful for people like you that do it. I wish you all the very best. I will be cheering you on as I watch the results on Saturday. Thank you, everyone, for watching. That has been another Slow Chat on a Thursday night. You're more than welcome, James. PM Thursdays every week or almost every week. We're back. You can find me on all the different socials. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next week. Cheers, guys.